25 years ago, a young woman in Denver named Lena Marquez vanished in absolute silence, leaving no trace whatsoever, shattering her family and leaving them with unspoken pain for decades. Authorities suspected her live-in boyfriend was involved, but with no body found and almost no leads to pursue, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet through all those years, one desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the slim chance that her daughter was still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. Then one day, while reviewing old documents in the case file, she discovered a crucial detail that everyone, including the investigators, had overlooked. A detail that could completely change the direction of the investigation and shock everyone involved in ways no one expected. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit subscribe. Denver, in the winter of 2001, was blanketed in a thick, heavy, cold atmosphere, the kind of setting that often slows every movement in the city, but can also easily conceal unusual things happening in silence. Lena Marquez, 32 years old, had moved to Lakewood just a few months earlier for temporary work at a furniture store while considering a return to California. She lived with her boyfriend Eric Donnelly, a former Marine who had been discharged a few years prior and was now working part-time at a nearby sporting goods store. The two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an aging building on Wadsworth Boulevard was where they shared their life, sometimes peacefully, sometimes tensely in recent weeks, though acquaintances of Lena had only heard vague hints through a few quick calls. On December 14th, according to her work schedule, Lena finished a later-than-usual shift and left the store as the season's first light snowflakes began to fall sporadically. A downstairs neighbor saw her return around 9 p.m., Lena, carrying a bag of groceries, walking quickly up the stairs, looking a bit tired but nothing out of the ordinary. That was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, the furniture store where Lena worked reported that she had not shown up on time, despite never having a history of unexcused tardiness. Coworkers tried calling but could not reach her. The landline in the apartment rang endlessly with no answer. Her family in California grew worried when text messages and emails sent from the previous evening went unanswered, a complete departure from Lena's usual frequent communication habits. That afternoon, a friend of Lena stopped by the apartment complex and saw her car still parked in its usual spot under a tree, covered in a thin layer of snow, indicating it had not been moved overnight. That detail stopped everyone cold. If Lena had gone somewhere, she almost always used her car. Phone, unreachable, no show at work, car still in place. No one had seen her leave the apartment. These fragmented pieces quickly coalesced into clear concern. By evening, after hours of searching with no sign of Lena, the family had to accept that she was truly missing and called the Lakewood Police Department. Just minutes later, around 8 p.m., Lakewood PD's dispatch received the call, initially handling it as a case of an adult female missing from work and out of contact for over 24 hours. However, the family's panic and the certainty in their account prompted the shift supervisor to assess the situation as having suspicious elements, immediately elevating priority and activating a field check protocol. 2 patrol officers were dispatched to Lena Marquez's apartment for a welfare check, while the intake unit called the family back to verify background information, last contact time, health status, daily routines, and whether Lena had ever mentioned leaving Denver suddenly or facing any personal difficulties. No data suggested Lena had ever run away, and the fact that she had not used her car further reinforced suspicion of an unusual incident. When the patrol team approached the apartment complex, the parking lot was still quiet. Lena's sedan in the exact same spot, now covered in a thicker layer of snow than when her friend had seen it that afternoon. Eric Donnelly opened the door when police knocked, his voice sounding somewhat tired and awkward but cooperative as he let them in to check. The small, tidy apartment showed no signs of furniture being shoved around or doors pried open. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry through the back window, no damaged items. The 2 officers conducted a standard walkthrough of the rooms. The bedroom was neat, bed made smoothly, a few of Lena's everyday items still on the dresser. The bathroom showed nothing unusual. The kitchen had no signs of mess or unfinished food. Everything indicated that if something had happened, it had left no visible trace in the apartment. When asked to explain the situation, Eric stated that, according to him, Lena had left the apartment around midnight, carrying a small purse, but not saying where she was going, and they had had a tense conversation earlier about work and finances. He recounted that he assumed she went to a friend's place, or stepped out to relieve stress. And since Lena often liked to drive around when upset, he wasn't overly worried at the time. However, this detail immediately conflicted with the reality that the car remained parked below. When police pressed him, Eric replied that he hadn't noticed how Lena left, and she might have walked. This information was noted, but could not yet be verified. After more than an hour of scene examination and initial statement collection, police determined that Lena's likely window of disappearance fell between 9 p.m., when the neighbor saw her return to the apartment, and midnight per Eric's account. The car still parked in place, her personal phone inactive since the previous afternoon. No signs of forced entry or preparation to leave led the case officer to classify the incident as missing adult with suspicious circumstances, a higher level than a voluntary runaway. This classification allowed Lakewood PD's Criminal Investigations Unit to take over the file at the initial assessment stage, while also placing it under monitoring status to prepare for expanded search efforts if the following hours continued to show anomalies. Right after the file was elevated, Lakewood Police Department moved into the first critical task of any suspicious missing persons case: reconstructing the victim's timeline in the hours and days leading up to the disappearance. The investigative team began by contacting the furniture store where Lena worked to confirm her departure time, the last people she interacted with, and any unusual behavior on her final day. The store manager provided information that Lena finished her shift at 8:27 p.m., completed her closing duties as usual, and showed no signs of stress, conflict, or indication of personal problems. Security camera footage at the exit captured Lena walking to the parking lot at 8:34 p.m., getting into her sedan, and leaving the area heading toward Wadsworth Boulevard. That was the last time-stamped verification from equipment. From there, police expanded information collection by cross-referencing statements from those who had contact with Lena that day. The family reported that Lena called her mother during her lunch break, a short but normal conversation. A close friend in California confirmed they exchanged texts around 5 p.m., discussing work and her intention to return to the West Coast, with no signs of anxiety or conflict with Eric. Lena's neighbors in Denver provided a key piece. They saw her return to the apartment around 9 p.m., carrying groceries, walking quickly up the stairs, alone and not appearing followed. This timing matched the travel window from work to home, reinforcing the timeline data. Police continued working with other neighbors on the same floor to gather more information about sounds, activity, or any unusual signs that evening. Most reported hearing no arguments, banging, or loud noises. One person at the end of the hallway vaguely recalled a fairly hard door closing around 9:45 p.m., but could not confirm which apartment it came from. When compared to Eric Donnelly's statement that Lena left near midnight after a tense conversation, police could not confirm the accuracy of this information. No one in the complex saw Lena leave, no one heard footsteps on the stairs after the time the neighbor confirmed her return, and there was no building security camera to verify. The period from when Lena entered the apartment to when Eric claimed she left became the largest gap in the timeline, one without independent witnesses and unverifiable by physical data. Police continued checking the landline in the apartment and Lena's mobile phone records. No outgoing or incoming calls after 6 p.m. The last mobile signal connection to a tower was around 5:30 p.m. before she started her shift, fully consistent with Lena silencing her phone during work hours. However, from 8 p.m. onward, no signal whatsoever from her device, no calls, no texts, no data access. This prevented investigators from marking any movement location after she left the furniture store. The next step in timeline reconstruction was cross-checking details in Eric Donnelly's statement. He claimed Lena walked out to get some air and relieve stress, but could not explain why she didn't take a coat, a detail Eric only mentioned after police directly asked if Lena took anything from the closet before leaving. Moreover, given the weather on the night of December 14th, temperatures dropping quickly below freezing with light snow, walking out without a coat was unreasonable. Another inconsistency was Lena not using her car. Store camera data showed her driving home, and friends described Lena as always using her car, even for short neighborhood trips. Leaving the vehicle in the lot and walking out only made the timeline more unstable and raised doubts that Eric's account might not accurately reflect what happened. When compiling data from the workplace, family statements, neighbor confirmations, and on-scene observations, police were able to sketch a relatively clear sequence of events up to Lena's return to the apartment. After that point, all events relied on a single source, Eric's account. This made the final roughly 3 hours, from 9 p.m. to near midnight per his statement, the most critical segment of the timeline requiring deeper scrutiny. Investigators flagged this as a high-risk blank period, necessitating careful examination of factors, the possibility of an argument, activities in the apartment that left no physical trace, the possibility Lena left and went missing elsewhere, the possibility of third-party intervention during this window. At the same time, police marked points for deeper follow-up in the next phase, checking additional traffic cameras near the apartment complex to verify if Lena appeared in the area after the time Eric said she left. Reviewing Eric's communication history before and after the disappearance, identifying people who had close contact with Lena in the prior week, and especially examining all items in the apartment for anything unusual that might suggest conflict or behavioral change on the night she vanished. The timeline was now complete at a foundational level, but its gaps, especially those final hours before Lena disappeared, became the focal point, forcing the investigation to continue expanding in more cautious and detailed directions. Immediately after completing the foundational timeline and recognizing the large gap during the period Lena was in the apartment, along with unverifiable details from Eric Donnelly's statement, Lakewood Police Department decided to proceed with the next step. A first formal scene search with CSI support to determine whether the apartment was the site of an incident leading to Lena's disappearance. The process began by securing the area to prevent external interference and documenting the full layout of the apartment with photos and video before touching any items. Several initial details were noted. The apartment was not messy, but had a few discrepancies from the living habits described by family, particularly the kitchen table being unusually clean, with no signs of use, despite relatives stating Lena often prepared a light snack in the evening after returning from work. CSI scanned surfaces likely to retain contact traces, bedroom doorknobs, hallway light switches, kitchen table edges, bed edges, sink ledge, and the floor area between the living room and kitchen. Although no clear signs of struggle were found, such as deep scratches, visible blood, or heavy impact marks, the team still collected small particle and fiber samples for analysis, as this was an older apartment building where microscopic traces could persist even after surface cleaning. One detail recorded in the report was a slightly displaced area of fibers on the living room carpet, forming an irregular curve inconsistent with normal use patterns. However, CSI only noted it as an anomaly requiring cross-reference without concluding a cause. In the bedroom, the bed was made flat, but the blanket at the foot had fresh creases differing from the otherwise flat and worn remainder. CSI opened all nightstand drawers to check for signs of rummaging or missing items, but everything appeared relatively organized with no obvious points indicating someone had searched or hidden anything inside. In the bathroom, towels were hung neatly, the floor dry. No watermarks, suggesting late-night use. This could or could not align with Lena's habits, so CSI flagged it for later family corroboration. In the kitchen, The team closely inspected the sink and drain pipes, collecting small residue samples to check for noteworthy organic material. The tops of the microwave and toaster, typically covered in fingerprints and dust, were cleaner than usual, prompting CSI to scan further with ALS light to detect recent wiping or treated liquid traces. A few faint reflective streaks appeared, but were insufficient for on-site identification, so surface samples were collected and sealed for lab analysis. In the living room, CSI found a nearly full box of tissues and a small tied trash bag that had not yet been taken to the communal dumpster. This bag was seized because in many missing persons cases, household trash from the final period before disappearance can contain indirect evidence, such as used tissues for wiping surfaces, torn packaging, or small discarded items. At the entryway, the doormat showed an asymmetrical impression, suggesting a heavy object had been placed there but then moved. However, the impression was too faint to identify a shape. Still, this was considered a point to cross-reference with Eric's description of items or prior family photos if available. All potentially relevant items, including floor samples, fiber samples, partially used tissues, the trash bag, reflective streaks on kitchen surfaces, and faint wiping marks on light switches, were sealed according to protocol with clear documentation of collection locations. In overall scene assessment, the investigative team and CSI concluded that the apartment showed no clear evidence of violence, yet they could not rule out the possibility that an incident occurred inside but was mitigated or cleaned up promptly. The absence of direct physical traces did not mean the apartment was not the point of origin for events, especially in cases where the time from disappearance to search exceeded 24 hours, allowing ample opportunity for scene alteration. The first scene report was completed with the conclusion that the apartment provided no clear evidence of a specific incident, yet contained enough asymmetrical details, from item placement to samples requiring further analysis, to advance the file to in-depth investigation phase. Because these points could not yet be explained by Eric's statement, the apartment was regarded as a critical link that could not be ruled out in the hypothesis that Lena disappeared right within her own living space. In the context of the first search, yielding no direct signs of conflict, but still leaving many questions, the Lakewood Police Department moved forward with a Level 1 search around the apartment complex to determine whether Lena Marquez had left the building voluntarily or involuntarily, and to locate any physical traces outside the interior space. Following standard protocol for suspicious missing adult cases, the initial search radius was set at 1 kilometer from the building's exit, encompassing the parking lot, emergency exits, trash collection area, rear yard, corridors leading to the main road, and the low tree line surrounding the west side of the complex. Patrol teams and foot search teams coordinated to divide the areas. They first checked all emergency exits, areas sometimes overlooked by residents, but often where unusual movement traces are recorded in missing persons cases. No clear footprints were visible due to fresh snow cover, but at one spot near the base of the first-floor emergency staircase, the snow showed slight displacement that was very difficult to date because of frequent resident traffic. Officers only marked the location and continued expanding the search. The trash collection area behind the building was checked next. Inside the large dumpsters, the search team found numerous resident trash bags, but none matched the type of bag seized from Lena's apartment during the prior search. This only indicated that Eric had not discarded trash after the time of disappearance without conclusive meaning. The area around the dumpsters showed no scattered items or drag marks. The parking lot inspection confirmed that all residents' vehicles were in their registered spots. Lena's car, an old silver sedan, was noted as unchanged since her friend saw it the previous afternoon. With a slightly thicker snow cover, no tire tracks, and no clear footprints around it except a few from neighbors passing by in the morning. The search team used high-powered flashlights to check undercarriages, wheel wells, and beneath other vehicles for any small dropped items, such as jewelry, keychains, employee badges, or anything Lena typically carried. Results were negative. Next, Search personnel scanned the bushes and open ground west of the complex, where public lighting was poor and pedestrian paths lacked surveillance cameras. They looked for signs of dropped items, scraps of fabric, purses, papers, or slide marks in the snow. Still, no detail was clear enough to confirm relevance. The entire process was documented to avoid oversights. Concurrently with the terrain sweep, the investigative team began checking surveillance camera systems in nearby areas. In 2001, residential and commercial cameras in Denver were not as widespread as in later decades, but some establishments still retained footage. Police obtained video from a convenience store about 200 meters from the complex, but the camera only captured the interior with no angle toward the street. A car garage across from the parking lot had an exterior camera that partially covered the building's parking entrance, though image quality was low, especially in nighttime conditions. When extracting footage from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., police only captured a few blurry images of resident vehicles coming and going. No figure was identifiable as Lena, and no scene showed anyone approaching her car. Around 11 p.m., and the camera recorded a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the frame, but the resolution was too low to determine gender or appearance, and the figure appeared for only a few seconds before disappearing from view. The investigative team marked this detail as unidentified image, requiring cross-reference with additional data, but could draw no further conclusions. When checking outbound vehicle footage, investigators confirmed no vehicle matching Lena's left the lot during the assessed window of her disappearance. This reinforced the hypothesis that the victim did not leave the area in her personal vehicle. Additionally, no camera captured Lena walking out of the complex, though the sparse camera coverage prevented absolute exclusion. During the sweep of pedestrian paths leading to Wadsworth Boulevard, the search team closely inspected utility poles, tree planters, and areas along perimeter walls for dropped items such as bus tickets, store membership cards, receipts, or scraps of fabric. Everything appeared naturally clean, with no suggestion of unusual traces. The Level 1 search results were compiled by the end of the day. No items belonging to Lena were found. No signs indicated the victim left the area by vehicle or was dragged. No witnesses saw her exit the complex, and the cameras yielded blurry data that provided little support for reconstructing Lena's movements after 9 p.m. Although no direct evidence emerged, the Level 1 search highlighted one key point. If Lena left the apartment, somehow her movement left no trace within the surrounding radius. Conversely, if she did not leave the area, the possibility of an incident occurring inside the building or even inside the apartment needed deeper consideration. Internal investigative notes recorded that the absence of traces in the surrounding area did not reduce the level of suspicion. On the contrary, it opened the hypothesis that the disappearance behavior may not have occurred on the periphery but originated within the victim's private space, where signs had been limited or erased before search forces arrived. This was a temporary but important conclusion that directed subsequent analysis and review steps within the building's scope. After completing the Level 1 search and collecting all nearby camera data, the Lakewood Police Department's Imaging Technical Unit moved to detailed frame-by-frame analysis to determine whether the shadowy figure in the garage camera held investigative value. They first extracted the full video segment from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., then used magnification and contrast adjustment software to improve clarity in the edge-of-frame area where the figure appeared for a few seconds. However, due to the camera's outdated technology, low resolution, and weak ambient light, magnification yielded little additional information. The body shape was blurred, with no distinguishable gender, age, or relative height. The figure stood still for about 2 seconds, then immediately moved out of the camera's view in a direction with no further recording devices. The technical team attempted shadow enhancement, noise filtering, and motion reconstruction tools, but all results showed only a vague outline insufficient for identification standards. The collected data only confirmed the presence of a person in the parking area during the relevant time frame, but could not affirm any connection to Lena Marquez's disappearance. While the technical unit continued exploring further frame recovery possibilities, the scene investigation team returned to work with second and third floor residents to gather independent accounts of the night Lena was last seen. Some neighbors vaguely recalled unusual noises but could not describe them in detail. One resident across the hallway reported hearing a fairly loud door slam around 9:45 p.m., but was unsure which floor it came from, because the building's structure transmitted sound in ways that easily caused confusion. Another downstairs resident stated they were up late and heard a few light sounds, like footsteps or something being lightly dragged, but could not confirm whether it was normal building activity or something from the apartment above. Notably, a corner hallway neighbor said they heard something like an object falling around 11 p.m. But when pressed further, admitted they had been watching TV that night and might have confused program sounds with hallway noises. Reliability was therefore rated low. When cross-referencing all statements, the investigative team noted clear inconsistencies, reported times of sounds varied, the nature of the noises was not clearly described, and no witness could confidently state that Lena left the apartment or that a stranger appeared on the floor during the suspicious window. The accounts were all subjective and lacked specificity, making them unusable for reconstructing any specific sequence of events. This was especially challenging because the disappearance occurred in winter, windows closed, residents rarely outside, and sound transmission in the old building often distorted. The team also tried to trace which residents might have passed through the hallway at that time. During interviews, most claimed they stayed indoors all evening and neither heard nor saw Lena leave. A young resident reported hearing quick footsteps in the hallway between 10 and 11 p.m., but could not say whether male or female, and when asked a second time, was no longer certain the sound occurred on the exact night of Lena's disappearance or the night before. This inconsistency led the statement to be rated as no investigative value. Police also considered the possibility that someone in the complex appeared on camera but was obscured due to poor recording angles. However, the obtained video showed no unusual resident activity. Vehicles, entering and exiting, matched the registration list, with no signs of unfamiliar vehicles approaching the lot during the relevant time. The only unverified appearance was the blurry figure at the frame's edge, but its extreme blurriness limited deep analysis to marginal results. The technical team concluded that this image could not serve as identification evidence and could only be treated as a vague reference detail in case additional information later emerged about timing or the presence of a suspicious individual in the area. When compiling all data from cameras and witness statements, the investigative team had to acknowledge that no clear investigative direction emerged from the initial analyses. No one saw Lena leave the apartment. No one heard arguing. No clear signs of an incident in common areas. No visual evidence of the victim being forced to leave or leaving voluntarily. This placed the entire case in a troubling state. All physical traces and accounts fell into the zone of insufficient to prove, yet insufficient to rule out. In the summary report, the lead detective noted that the camera analysis and witness statements produced no viable investigative branches. The data was primarily negative rather than affirmative. The disappearance therefore could not yet progress in any specific direction, and the building where Lena lived continued to hold center stage in a mystery, with no witnesses, no images, no traces of departure, making the decoding of the victim's final hours more obscure than ever. In the context of the camera and witness analyses yielding no clear leads, the investigative team refocused on the sole source of information about Lena Marquez's final hours. The statement of Eric Donnelly, the victim's live-in partner and the last person to report seeing her. The first formal interview was scheduled at Lakewood Police Department headquarters to document Eric's movements and behavior on the night of Lena's disappearance and to verify related time elements. When asked to recount his full movements from 7 p.m. until the next morning, Eric described an unremarkable evening. He said he stayed home after work, watched TV, and Lena returned around 9 p.m. The two had a conversation that was not tense but somewhat heavy about finances and future plans. According to Eric, after the conversation, he showered for about 15 minutes, then returned to the living room to continue watching TV. Around near midnight, Lena grabbed a small purse and walked out to get some air. He claimed she did not say where she was going, and he assumed she might go to a friend's place, so he did not follow or watch how she left the apartment. When pressed for precise timings, Eric provided only approximate markers: around 9 p.m., around 11:30 or quarter to 12. I went to sleep after 1 a.m. The investigators asked him to align the time markers with the TV programs he said he watched to narrow the window. Here, the first contradiction appeared. The program he said he watched from 10 to 11 p.m. was a rerun aired from 8 to 9 p.m. that night. When questioned again, Eric said he might have mixed up the day or watched a previously recorded segment on VHS. However, when asked to describe the VHS tape, he could not recall the program title clearly, let alone where he stored the tape. The second time contradiction involved his shower for about 15 minutes. But CSI had noted no lingering steam traces in the bathroom, consistent with a shower more than 24 hours before the search, yet offering no verification of whether he showered in the claimed window. This carried no exculpatory value, but placed his stated timeline in a hard-to-verify zone. When investigators asked Eric to describe Lena's clothing when she left the apartment, he said she wore a light top and jeans without a coat. Compared to the near-freezing temperatures outside on the night of December 14th, this detail continued to raise suspicion, especially since Lena's friends affirmed she always took a coat even for short outings. When asked why he did not find her leaving without a coat unusual, he only said, "I thought she was just stepping out for a bit and would come back." Continuing cross-checking, investigators asked Eric for information about calls, texts, or any contact he made after Lena left the apartment. Eric replied that he did not call her because he thought she wanted some space. However, when police requested to view his phone, the call log showed an outgoing call at 12:08 a.m. But Eric said he didn't remember calling anyone. The call lasted 19 seconds, with no clear content, and the other party did not answer. When questioned, he suggested it might have been an accidental dial. Investigators still noted this as a detail requiring further check. When asked why he did not report to police or Lena's family the next day, Eric said he thought she would come back in the morning. This passivity, consistent with some voluntary disappearances, was insufficient to conclude he was concealing anything, but did not fully align with the reality that Lena missed work and contacted no one. Regarding cooperation level, Eric appeared calm, answered questions relatively steadily, and showed no strong reactions. He agreed to have the interview recorded and consented to further CSI searches of the apartment if needed. However, his answers lacked specificity, particularly when describing time markers or actions during the roughly 3 hours from Lena's return home to when he said she left. The investigative team noted this could simply be typical inconsistency from someone unaccustomed to recalling details under pressure, but it could also signal avoidance of providing key information. Still, at the time of the interview, there was insufficient physical data to prove Eric's direct involvement in Lena's disappearance. No signs of violence in the apartment, no witnesses saw him taking Lena out, no camera captured unusual activity, and everything police had was loose time markers and some unverifiable inconsistencies. The report concluding the first interview stated clearly, contradictions existed, but they had not yet reached the level of elevating Eric to suspect status. Investigators recommended continued monitoring of his statements through subsequent interview rounds, cross-referencing with scene analysis results and timing data, to see if changes in his account or details of sufficient weight emerged to reassess Eric's role in the disappearance. The first interview with Eric Donnelly did not yield a breakthrough and did not generate any specific investigative leads, leading the Lakewood Police Department to decide to expand the search radius to Level 2, covering 4 kilometers from Lena Marquez's apartment. while deploying a K-9 team specialized in missing persons scent detection to determine whether there were any traces of Lena's movement outside the immediate area around the building. The scent sample chosen was a sweater and scarf that Lena used daily, recovered from her bedroom in an unwashed state, as reported by family witnesses, providing better conditions for the working dogs to identify the scent. The K-9 team consisted of 2 primary scent dogs and 1 support team following behind, beginning their search from the main exit of the building the following morning, when weather conditions were more favorable and snowfall was lighter compared to the night of the disappearance. However, the delay from the last confirmed sighting of Lena to the deployment of the K-9, nearly 48 hours, made the risk of the scent having dissipated or been obscured by environmental factors very high. Right in the parking lot area, the K-9s showed no clear response to any direction of movement, consistent with camera data indicating no vehicle departure activity and no evidence that the victim had been in the parking area after 9 p.m. The search team shifted focus to the pedestrian path leading to the nearest park, Bear Creek Greenbelt, an area with trails, dense trees, and a small stream, one of the locations where a pedestrian could appear at night without attracting attention. At the trailhead entrance, the K-9s exhibited a mild reaction when Lena's clothing was brought close, but the response was not strong enough to be considered a directional signal. Due to the high foot traffic in this public area, mixed scents significantly reduced the ability to distinguish. As they moved deeper into the trail, the K-9 team stopped at the intersection of 2 smaller paths, where 1 dog reacted toward the stream bank, giving a short bark and pulling the handler in the direction of the water. The search team immediately expanded the sweep in this area, checking along the stream bank for over 150 meters. However, heavy snowfall over the 2 days had completely covered any human footprints, and no dropped items or any signs indicating someone had stopped or been dragged through the area were found. The K-9 reaction was noted, but assessed as low-level, possibly due to wind-carrying scents from nearby residential areas down the trail. Continuing the search, the team swept 2 additional small parks within a 3 kilometers radius, including Kendrick Park and the vacant lot behind a small shopping center. In these areas, the K-9 said showed almost no reaction, particularly at Kendrick Park, where many people walk dogs and animal scents are dense. The scent dogs had difficulty maintaining focus. The search team therefore primarily conducted visual sweeps of low bushes, benches, and areas near the artificial lake to look for signs of a purse, jacket, documents, or personal items of Lena. Things that could have been left behind or discarded after leaving the apartment. The search yielded no results. When expanding further eastward, the K-9 team reached an area with many warehouses and small commercial facilities, where nighttime lighting was sparse and foot traffic was lower. Behind an abandoned warehouse, 1 dog showed a stronger reaction, pulling the handler close to the wall, sniffing continuously, and circling the same spot. This was the most notable reaction of the day, but when the CSI team checked on site, they found no items or signs related to the case. The wall surface only had normal moisture streaks from condensation. Because this area was frequently used by homeless individuals, the K-9 may have been reacting to general human body odor rather than Lena's specific scent. The distance from here to Lena's building was 3.7 kilometers, still within the level 2 radius. But there was no image data or witness evidence indicating Lena had left the apartment to come here. In the summary report, the K-9 handler emphasized that the dog's reactions were not confirmatory, but only suggestive, especially under snowy conditions, low temperatures, and a delay of more than 2 days since Lena was confirmed missing. The search team also swept the area along the roadside, leading to Wadsworth Boulevard, where many public trash cans and low grass areas were checked for dropped items. A wet paper bag was found, but it contained nothing and was unrelated to Lena. At the parking lot of a small strip mall, the search team discovered a pair of black women's gloves, but the family confirmed Lena did not own gloves of this type. Subsequent checks showed they had simply been left there recently. The entire 2-4 kilometers area was thoroughly evaluated, both visually and with K-9 assistance, but no findings were strong enough to be considered leads. The official report stated clearly that the outer perimeter could not be completely ruled out. But there was no positive evidence indicating Lena had left the apartment complex on foot the night she disappeared. The preliminary conclusion of the Level 2 search phase revealed a troubling pattern. Despite the expanded search radius and the use of highly reliable canine methods, no movement path for Lena was established, no discarded evidence was found, and all canine reactions fell into the not sufficiently distinctive category. These overall results further reinforced a hypothesis that was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. If Lena's disappearance involved foul play or harm, it was highly likely the incident did not occur outside the apartment complex or on public routes, and the lack of traces in the expanded area indicated that subsequent investigative steps needed to focus more heavily on signs inside the building and individuals who had direct contact with the victim in the final hours before she vanished. 10 days after the Level 2 search concluded without any leads, Lena Marquez's family unexpectedly reported a new development to the Lakewood Police Department. They had received an email from Lena sent to the family's shared inbox, using the exact personal email address Lena had used for many years. The email was sent around dawn Denver time, which immediately struck the family as unusual because Lena rarely sent emails at such hours, especially ones with important content. The message was brief, stating only that she wanted to change environments, needed some time alone, and that everyone doesn't need to worry, I'll get in touch when I'm ready. The family described the tone of the email as unlike Lena. The writing was stiff, lacking the warmth typically seen in her correspondence, and even contained some grammatical errors that, according to her mother, my daughter never wrote like that. Moreover, the email made no mention whatsoever of her vanishing without a trace. Her job, the car she left behind, or any specific reason explaining her sudden disappearance. These details significantly increased the family's level of suspicion about the email. The report to police was made the same day, and the investigative team opened a separate case file to evaluate the email's authenticity. However, digital forensic technology in 2001 was limited. The email server used by the family did not provide detailed originating IP logs, and tracing the source only reached an intermediate server, unable to pinpoint a specific geographic location or sending device. As a result, police could not verify whether the email was sent from Denver, another state, or an entirely unrelated location. During the official meeting with the family, police raised the possibility that Lena had left the city on her own. They cited precedents where some adults choose to leave their old environment to find some peace without notifying loved ones, and the email could be a sign she was still safe. Nevertheless, the family strongly rejected this hypothesis for several reasons. Lena left all her personal belongings behind, had made no withdrawals from her bank account in the past 10 days, had not contacted any close friends, had no identification documents with her, and her car, the only means of transportation she had in Denver, remained in the parking lot. These signs were completely inconsistent with the behavior of someone intentionally leaving the city on their own terms. Police noted the inconsistencies, but simultaneously emphasized that, at this point, the email was the only data indicating Lena was alive after the night of her disappearance, regardless of its unproven authenticity. Per procedure, the investigative team printed the full email content, filed it, and compared it to previous emails from Lena provided by the family. Although there were differences in tone, there was no strong technical basis to prove the email had been tampered with or fabricated. Some investigators also noted that changes in writing style after a period of psychological stress are not uncommon, but this was only an assumption, not a conclusion. The subsequent internal report showed that the email's appearance temporarily shifted the case evaluation slightly toward adult, possibly left residents voluntarily. As a result, although the case was not closed, police temporarily reduced the priority of direct field searches while awaiting further data. The inability to trace the IP in the context of 2001 technology left the investigative team more uncertain than reassured. They could not prove the email was genuine, but neither could they prove it was fake, causing the case to fall into a gray area of information where all possibilities remained open, but none had clear evidence. The family left the police station feeling more uneasy than hopeful. They understood the email did not sound like Lena, yet they had no way to convince the authorities to treat it as a suspicious signal rather than a reassurance. The disappearance case thus entered a difficult phase, an ambiguous email of undetermined origin, sufficient to prevent dismissal, but also sufficient to derail the initial assessment, causing the entire search and verification effort to enter a temporary state of stagnation without any additional concrete data to pursue. Although the email from Lena temporarily tilted the case evaluation toward the possibility that she left the city voluntarily, the team handling the file still decided to proceed with Level 3 search deployment at a location provided by family and friends. Clear Creek Canyon, a place Lena had visited several times on weekends for hiking and relaxation. This was a complex terrain area with trails along cliff edges, jagged rock fields, and deep stream sections, posing many fall risks that would not be easily detected without witnesses. Based on Lena's personal journal, provided by the family, she had described the place as a spot to go when I want quiet, leading investigators to view it as one of the few locations potentially relevant if the voluntary departure hypothesis was considered. The search operation was organized for early morning, when weather was temporarily stable and snow had partially melted. The search team included patrol officers, local terrain rescue personnel, and a group of volunteers who had previously assisted in regional missing persons cases. The first task was to establish sweep lines from the parking area along Highway 6 deep into the canyon via 3 main trails: the Lower Clear Creek Trail section, the eastern cliff edge area, and an unmarked trail commonly used by locals. Each group was assigned parallel search lanes to ensure no cliffs, rock piles, or low tree hollows were missed. Rescue team members checked every point considered a fall risk, from trail edge drop-offs to slippery mud sections near the stream. At a point about 1.2 kilometers from the entrance, the search team discovered an area with slide marks on damp soil, but upon close inspection, the marks were identified as from a large animal, most likely deer or elk. There were no shoe prints, clothing marks, or any items indicating a human had slid down there. Continuing deeper, the rescue team examined steep drop sections where a victim could have accidentally fallen. They used safety ropes and climbing gear to descend into rock crevices, checking every square meter in low-light areas. No purse, clothing, fabric scraps, or traces belonging to Lena were found. Some broken branches were noted, but upon evaluation, they had snapped due to accumulated winter snow weight rather than human impact. In the stream area, the team waded upstream and used long poles to probe deep water pockets. The water's cold made observation difficult, but the flow was clear enough to see large objects if present. No evidence was found, and no body shape or fabric appeared in the water. The search teams also examined soft soil areas where footprints or dropped items could be recorded if Lena had passed through. But all traces belonged to animals or prior pre-winter hikers. One detail recorded in the report was there was no indication whatsoever that an adult had newly appeared in the canyon during the period from Lena's disappearance to the search deployment. This data indirectly supported the assessment that if Lena had gone to Clear Creek Canyon, she would have left physical traces, but in reality, none were present. The investigative team also checked the parking area near the canyon. No vehicles matched Lena's car, consistent with her vehicle still being at the apartment lot. Nevertheless, they inspected trash cans, parking edges, and low grass areas for small items, store cards, or receipts that might have fallen, but nothing was found. In the end-of-day report, the search team leader concluded that Clear Creek Canyon could not be entirely ruled out from the hypothesis, but there were no signs supporting the view that Lena had been there after the night of her disappearance. No body, no evidence, no footprints, no signs of stopping to rest or lingering movement at any location. In other words, the canyon provided no additional leads, but played an important role in helping investigators narrow possibilities. If Lena had left the apartment voluntarily to find quiet, as the email implied, it would be highly unlikely for her to choose such a distant location without transportation and without leaving any trace. The report concluded that the Level 3 search line was completed without yielding useful data, and the case remained in a state lacking clear evidence, once again showing that Lena's disappearance did not easily fit common voluntary runaway patterns, while continuing to leave law enforcement in a stalemate, as all efforts to expand the scope failed to produce any new signs. In the context of field searches and camera analysis yielding no progress, the Lakewood investigative team shifted to another critical approach, tracing Lena Marquez's financial records to determine whether there was any card usage, bank transactions, or electronic traces that could provide information about her movements after the time of her disappearance. Police submitted an official request to the bank, where Lena held her account, to retrieve transaction data for the most recent 3 months, with particular focus on the period from 2 weeks before the disappearance up to the present. After verifying identity and legal basis, the bank provided a detailed transaction statement, including credit history, debits, ATM withdrawals, and balance inquiry requests. Most transactions prior to December 14th aligned with Lena's usual spending habits: payments at the furniture store where she worked, a few small grocery purchases, and one cash withdrawal of $40 before her shift on December 13th. However, an anomaly appeared in a transaction dated exactly 4 days before the disappearance, a $200 cash withdrawal from an ATM in Orange County, California. This detail was shocking because Lena had not left Denver by personal vehicle, no one had received information that she had flown, and there was no data proving she had traveled out of Colorado during that time frame. The transaction was recorded at 3:12 p.m. Pacific Time, prior even to the time the From Lena email was received by the family. The investigative team immediately cross-referenced the ATM transaction timestamp with Eric Donnelly's statements. Eric maintained that he did not know Lena had left Denver, and that on the night of December 14th, she left the apartment with only a small handbag, without a coat or essentials for long-distance travel. If his account was true, Lena's presence in California 4 days after disappearing became implausible, especially since she had no transportation, identification, or luggage with her. The bank confirmed the transaction as valid, but had no accompanying camera footage because the ATM was an older model that no longer retained images. The investigative team checked further. The ATM was located outside a small grocery store with no separate CCTV system, and neighboring businesses had no cameras facing the ATM area. This left police unable to verify whether the person withdrawing was Lena or someone else using her card. They also could not determine when the card had been taken from the apartment, as Eric claimed he did not know whether Lena had taken it with her, and there were no signs of forced entry to suggest the card had been stolen. The $200 withdrawal, not large but sufficient for basic spending, continued to push the case into ambiguity because it raised a possibility investigators had to consider: Lena's card may have been used by someone else after her disappearance. However, in the absence of camera footage, IP data, witnesses, and physical evidence of card coercion, police could not attribute responsibility to anyone. Deeper analysis showed that Lena rarely withdrew large amounts of cash. $200 was an uncommon withdrawal size for her. The transaction also occurred more than 1,000 kilometers from Denver, inconsistent with all prior data on Lena's activities. When re-interviewed about this detail, Eric's reaction was noted as surprised but offering no additional information. He continued to assert no contact with Lena after the night of the disappearance. The investigative team also checked flight itineraries from Denver to California, but no tickets were booked under the victim's name during the relevant period. No long-distance bus trips or car rentals were found under her name. This reduced the likelihood that Lena had actually been in California, while increasing the likelihood that someone else had used her card. However, because the transaction lacked confirming imagery and no other unusual account activity followed, police could not conclude it was fraud or evidence of criminal activity. The financial investigation results, rather than clarifying the case, made the process even more convoluted. A single unverified transaction, conducted in another state, inconsistent with Lena's daily behavior and Eric's statements. In the final summary report for this phase, investigators noted, the financial transaction does not prove Lena is alive, nor does it prove she left Denver. The lack of visual evidence or electronic traces renders the data unusable for assigning responsibility. With that conclusion, despite heightened suspicion, police still lacked grounds to elevate Eric Donnelly, or any person to suspect status, and the case remained in a stalemate, with each new lead only adding inconsistency to the narrative rather than revealing answers. The first 3 months since Lena Marquez's disappearance concluded with a heavy investigative summary, reflecting a prolonged impasse despite the full efforts of the Lakewood Police Department. Level 1, 2, and 3 searches produced no verifiable physical evidence. The apartment examination found no signs of forced entry or violence. Area camera analysis identified no imagery that could confirm Lena's movements after returning home near 9 p.m. K-9 team reactions remained insufficiently distinctive to guide searches, and Clear Creek Canyon, the location considered highly plausible if Lena had left voluntarily for personal reasons, provided no indication she had ever been there after the disappearance. The financial investigation, expected to potentially open new leads, added another layer of ambiguity with the discovery of the California ATM transaction, but no accompanying camera, no electronic proof of the withdrawer, and no matching travel data to confirm Lena's presence in another state. The family confirmed no knowledge of Lena planning to leave Denver. Friends received no messages expressing a sudden desire to change environments, and her lifestyle habits did not suggest she would abandon all personal belongings, vehicle, job, and vanish without notice. All these factors left the initial investigative picture devoid of any major anchors, no physical evidence, no witnesses, no location data, no departure traces, no clear timeline after 9 p.m. Every investigative branch halted at the limit of insufficient information to rule out, insufficient information to confirm. The file further noted that Eric Donnelly's statements, despite inconsistencies in timing and implausible details in his description, could not be entirely dismissed due to lack of supporting evidence. His depiction of Lena leaving the apartment on foot in cold weather, without a coat, without using the car, without personal items, and without further contact, all highly suspicious but not usable as incriminating proof. Meanwhile, the From Lena email continued to muddy the file, as 2001 technology lacked the capability to trace IP origins for verification. Despite the message's tone not matching her style, police were required to acknowledge the theoretical possibility that Lena could still be alive and had left voluntarily, creating procedural obstacles to pursuing a criminal direction. Field search teams had exhausted viable options, and all reasonably scoped locations had returned negative results. No body discovery reports, no personal items left behind, no unfamiliar vehicles or witnesses seeing Lena leave the building. Not even any leads suggesting she had left Denver after the night of disappearance beyond the unverified ATM transaction. All these elements led the lead investigator to conclude that continuing field searches was no longer effective, and resources could not be maintained at a high level indefinitely in a case showing no signs of progress. In the final meeting of the initial phase, investigators agreed that no further proactive investigative avenues were feasible at that time. The report recommended suspending direct search activities and moving the case to passive investigation status, meaning reactivation only upon the emergence of new data, new evidence, new statements, or any element that could alter the case dynamics. The family was informed that while the file was not closed, active investigation had to be paused due to lack of basis for expansion. This was an unwanted conclusion. An adult woman vanished in the heart of Denver, leaving no trace, no witnesses seeing her after the last night she returned home. And after 3 months of effort, every investigative direction had reached a dead end, leaving a missing persons file that seemed to have neither beginning nor end. Entering early 2002, after a complete review of all documents, scene reports and search results that yielded no specific progress, the Lakewood Police Department officially placed Lena Marquez's disappearance into the cold case category under Code Cold Case, CC 01147. This decision was issued following the final evaluation meeting, in which investigators concluded the case did not meet the minimum data threshold for continued active investigation, no verifiable physical evidence, no witnesses seeing Lena after 9 p.m. on the night of disappearance, no traces of departure from the apartment complex, no verified travel itinerary, and no sufficiently clear sequence of events to establish a reasonable investigative scope. Despite the team conducting 3 tiers of expanded searches, full analysis of nearby cameras, scrutiny of financial activity, and close examination of questionable points in Eric Donnelly's statements, the case still did not surpass the level of lacking basis for pursuit. The purported from Lena email and the California ATM transaction further plunged the file into informational chaos, weakening the ability to steer the case toward criminal without corroborating evidence. The comprehensive report submitted to the Cold Case Unit stated clearly, "No empirical data confirms voluntary departure behavior, nor does any data support a criminal hypothesis. The current file does not qualify for active investigation maintenance. Accordingly, file CC 01147 was transferred to passive monitoring status, meaning reactivation only if new leads emerged from the public, evidence discoveries, additional forensic analysis results, or new credible statements." The family was notified that the case was not permanently closed, but all investigative activity at that point had to be suspended. With all documents and seized evidence stored in the cold case archive, pending future technological conditions and data that might help decode Lena's disappearance. No one anticipated that code CC 01147, once assigned, would remain unsolved for more than 2 decades. Becoming one of the quietest missing persons cases in Lakewood at the time, a nearly motionless file, preserved only by the faint hope that someday a new detail would emerge to break the absolute silence enveloping the case since 2001. During the period 2003-2010, file CC 01147 for Lena Marquez remained dormant in the Lakewood Police Department's cold case category. Reopened only periodically during annual review cycles, but never producing data sufficient to trigger active investigation. During this time, authorities recorded a total of 8 public reports claiming sightings of a woman resembling Lena in various locations, including Denver, Colorado Springs, and even one instance in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Each report was preliminarily cross-checked against Lena's physical description, height, build, hair color, clothing habits. However, none reached the required level of match, and when investigators followed up with the reporting parties, most proved to be fleeting, vague observations or misidentifications of similarly appearing individuals. Also during this period, Lena's family continued independent search efforts, organizing several trips to areas Lena had visited or was thought possibly to frequent: Clear Creek Canyon, Bear Creek Greenbelt, and a few locations outside Denver where the family hoped to find discarded personal items. Some local volunteers who had participated in the initial searches even self-organized support on weekends. However, over many years, no physical evidence, fabric scraps, jewelry, or personal effects were identified as belonging to Lena. Several collected items, such as a plastic bracelet, a grocery store membership card, or old shoes left in rock crevices, were submitted to police, but subsequent checks showed they were unrelated. The family also received 2 suspicious emails in 2004 and 2006, both sent from untraceable accounts and containing only cryptic phrases like, "I'm still okay," or "Don't look for me anymore." When forwarded to police, these emails were deemed unverifiable, easily created by anonymous early internet accounts, especially since nothing indicated the content originated from Lena herself or someone familiar with her life. Other spontaneous family search efforts, such as posting new flyers, contacting religious organizations, holding fundraising events to maintain media profiles, produced no breakthroughs. As years passed, contacts in Lena's social network gradually drifted away from Denver, making tracing based on her network increasingly difficult. On the police side, cold case review reports in 2005, 2007, and 2009 all recorded the same conclusion. The file lacked physical data, lacked new leads, and showed no signs of criminal activity or indications the victim was still alive. The 2001 California ATM transaction, once hoped to open investigative paths, remained without additions by this stage: no witnesses, no imagery, no matching identity theft cases, and no subsequent economic activity in the account. The 2008 report even noted that the case fit almost none of the adult missing persons patterns in contemporaneous statistics: too few traces, too little data to classify as voluntary departure, yet insufficient evidence to confirm criminal elements. The only clear fact was Lena's complete disappearance from all systems, medical, financial, legal, for nearly a decade. Throughout 2003, 2010, file CC0-11,147 thus remained static, existing only as an unsolved missing persons case, lacking data to reopen yet impossible to classify as voluntary disappearance. To police, it was a non-moving file. To the family, it was prolonged waiting, where each scattered lead appeared and vanished without creating any change, leaving Lena's story drifting toward the dimmest corner of a cold case, an existing but non-progressing case, neither forgotten nor advancing. By 2020, nearly 2 decades after file CC0-11,147 was moved to the cold case archive, the Lakewood Police Department entered a phase of modernizing its storage systems, migrating all older investigative files to a new digital management platform to standardize data and enable modern forensic analysis. This was a large-scale project applied to all pre-2010 cases, including long-pending ones like Lena Marquez's disappearance. As Lena's file was transferred to the new system, all physical documents, investigative reports, interview transcripts, scene photos, financial records, backed-up camera data were scanned and digitized with identifying codes, allowing faster access and easier software analysis. During the data standardization process, a young technician in the cold case unit, who had never previously worked on Lena's file, was assigned to scan and upload all original electronic text, including the printed email purportedly from Lena sent to the family 10 days after her disappearance. Although this email had previously been regarded as an unverified lead with no adequate verification tools in 2001, the digitization protocol required all electronic form data to be categorized and run through the new software's automated metadata analysis system. This system could reread the full email structure, including headers, sending server codes, timestamp parameters, standardized formatting, and hidden fields inaccessible with 2001 technology. When the email was uploaded and the software began analysis, the system immediately flagged anomalous data in the metadata section. Specifically, the email header field showed a format inconsistent with the server specifications used by the family's email provider in 2001. The received field timestamps indicated routing through a West Coast intermediary server, but the timestamp code chain was incompatible with the service provider's time synchronization system at the time. The software also detected an X-mailer line in the metadata, a field recording the application or device used to compose the email, showing a string corresponding to a version of email software for Sony Vaio laptops, a type never mentioned in the file and with no information indicating Lena ever owned one. This prompted the technician to note header inconsistent with valid email sending conditions and mark the anomaly report for closer review by the cold case team. Additionally, The system identified another anomaly. The metadata timestamp showed a deviation of several minutes from the time displayed in the email body. A small but unusual discrepancy in legitimate user-composed emails due to processing through external editing tools or unsynchronized servers. All of this suggested that the 2001 email may not have been sent in the conventional manner, or at least not created directly from the original account, as police had previously assumed. The technician then compared this email's metadata with other emails provided by the family for Lena's sending habit comparison. All emails Lena sent before her disappearance had consistent metadata structure, the same sending server system, synchronized timestamps, and no Xmailer field indicating unfamiliar devices. The anomalous 2001 email was the only outlier. These discrepancies could not have been detected with the technology available when the case first occurred. When the summary results report was forwarded to the Cold Case Division Coordinator, the official assessment was issued. Email metadata inconsistent with the victim's normal email sending behavior. The possibility that the sending source did not originate from a device or account controlled by the victim requires re-evaluation. This discovery of inconsistencies did not provide conclusive proof, but for the first time in nearly 20 years, file CC011147 produced a signal capable of reversing the initial assessment. The email, once viewed as the sole evidence suggesting Lena's voluntary departure, now carried technical inconsistencies, suggesting it may have been sent by someone else or via a different device than the one the victim had used. Although the finding was not sufficient to reactivate the file, it generated renewed interest from the cold case team and marked the first time in many years that a detail in Lena Marquez's case showed signs suitable for re-examination with modern forensic technology. The discovery of anomalous metadata in the 2001 email prompted the cold case unit to transfer file CC011147 to the Specialized Digital Forensics Analysis Group for a re-examination of the full email structure using more advanced tools, which the Lakewood Police Department did not have at the time of the case. The family's printed email was only part of the data. More critical was the raw file copy stored in the archive as a text file containing the original headers, something police in 2001 lacked the capability to fully exploit. When this file was loaded into dedicated forensic software, the system immediately displayed all hidden email fields in full, including the complete received chain, message ID, precise timestamps down to the second, and especially the identifiers of the intermediary servers the message passed through. This analysis confirmed the discrepancies noted in the prior report, but more importantly, a new detail emerged. The received from string in the first header field showed an IP address not from the Colorado region as expected, but from an IP block registered in the Dana Point, California area in December 2001. The forensic system identified this IP as belonging to a range managed by an internet service provider in Southern California during the period 1999. 2003. This was a major turning point, because if the email had been sent by Lena herself, it should have originated from the area where she was living, namely Lakewood. Unless she had actually traveled without leaving any financial transportation or witness traces. To rule out technical error, the forensics team reran the analysis multiple times, compared it against data from other emails from the same period, and uploaded the file to 2 independent forensic tools. The results were fully consistent. The email was sent through a computer connected to the internet in California, not Colorado. When the IP data chain was cross-referenced with server routing paths, the forensic software further determined that the actual send time was 4 minutes earlier than the time displayed in the email, a deviation characteristic of server synchronization across different time zones, reinforcing the accuracy of the trace. This finding raised the next question: who could have sent the email from California at that time? To answer, the cold case team began reviewing residency data, travel history, and personal information of those closest to Lena in 2001. 2002, with the primary focus on Eric Donnelly, the only person living with the victim at the time of her disappearance and the sole source of information about her final hours. Upon checking Eric's post-disappearance residency records, the team discovered he moved out of Denver around late 2001 or early 2002, and by mid-2002 had registered a temporary address in Southern California. Digging deeper, records showed he began working at a sporting goods store in Laguna Niguel, just a few miles from Dana Point. The geographic proximity, combined with the timing of residency, created a striking coincidence if the email was sent from Dana Point or its vicinity in late December 2001. The person with access to Lena's personal information and close enough to manipulate her email account at that time was Eric. Nevertheless, the forensics team had to ensure the analysis remained technical before drawing conclusions. They continued examining the message ID field, a unique string indicating the sending email client. The retrieved data confirmed that the email application used was not a web browser like the one Lena typically used when emailing her family, but an offline application commonly installed on older laptops, matching the anomalous Xmailer string from Section 15, suggesting a Sony Vaio device. When compared to emails Lena had sent previously, none used this application. This meant 1. The 2001 email was sent from a completely different device than the one the victim had used. 2. It was sent from a location over 1,000 kilometers from Denver. 3. There was no evidence Lena had ever left Denver for California. When combined, these three factors reduced the likelihood that Lena herself sent the email to near zero. When the compiled report was forwarded to the cold case coordinator, the most critical question arose: who else could have sent the email, and for what reason? Although an immediate answer was not possible, the technical data was sufficient to demonstrate that the email, the lead that had previously tilted the case toward the voluntary departure hypothesis, now bore characteristics of manipulation or sending by someone with intent to conceal. The cold case team further cross-checked Eric's 2002 residency history and found he had lived at 3 different addresses in Southern California, including one less than a 10-minute drive from the server location tied to the originating IP. No data showed he had reported his departure from Denver to police immediately after the disappearance, and he had never mentioned living near Dana Point in his 2001 interviews. These coincidences did not prove criminal conduct, but they formed such a clear anomalous pattern that the cold case team issued a formal recommendation, file CC-01-1147, now contained new data of sufficient value to reopen the investigation, with focus on the email's authenticity and the possibility of interference by an individual directly connected to the victim. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Lena Marquez's disappearance case showed genuine signs of potentially shifting the entire narrative, as a seemingly faint lead became a technical knot, indicating the case was very likely not a voluntary departure as previously assumed. When the digital forensics report from the preceding section was forwarded to the federal level per protocol for missing persons cases involving signs of victim identity falsification, the FBI Denver field office officially accepted the assistance request and deployed a specialized team for behavioral reconstruction based on historical data. Their first step was to create a comprehensive cross-reference table between the original 2001 data and the new data obtained after digitization. Lena's work shift schedule, surviving landline call logs, initial scene reports, 2001 witness statements, bank financial reports, and Eric's movement timeline drawn from residency and employment registration records. All were input into the FBI's behavioral analysis system, enabling full reconstruction of the event sequence using timeline rebuilding algorithms for missing persons cases where impersonation or concealment is central. The initial modeling step eliminated hypotheses inconsistent with physical data. Lena made no ATM withdrawals after the night of November 17, 2001 at any Denver area point. No direct witness confirmed seeing her after 8:45 p.m. No traces of personal vehicle movement existed since her car remained in the apartment parking lot. The apartment landline made no outgoing calls after the last time neighbors reported seeing lights on. These factors caused the algorithm to automatically rule out the possibility of Lena voluntarily leaving the area in a short window without any triggering events. A pattern the FBI termed low visibility disappearance with static footprint, meaning the victim vanished under conditions with no preparatory behavior whatsoever. Next, the email characteristics were fed into the analysis: California IP address, email client not used by the victim, and send time days after Lena had already been reported missing. The system assessed the probability of the victim being alive at the time the email was sent as extremely low, and the probability of identity falsification as very high. This placed the Lena left voluntarily hypothesis below the FBI's minimum reliability threshold and removed it from the reconstruction model. The FBI then incorporated data on the final social interactions into the model. Eric's contradictory timing statements, his cohabitation yet inconsistent timeline provision, and his repeated emphasis that Lena wanted to go somewhere to think. When the system compared his statements against verified physical timestamps, the algorithm detected a critical chain of contradictions. Eric claimed he left the apartment at 10:30 p.m. to go for a drive. But parking lot cameras recorded no vehicle movement related to his car between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. simultaneously. Eric said he returned home at 1 a.m., but the building's stairwell lighting system logged the apartment keycard being swiped to open the door at 11:12 p.m. The only individuals with apartment keycards were Eric and Lena. This triggered an algorithm discrepancy flag level 2, indicating statement inconsistencies likely tied to concealment behavior. When Eric's 2002 California movement data was added to the model, the system detected his presence within a 10 kilometers radius of the email IP origination point, precisely at the time the email was created. Eric's failure to mention this in any prior interviews heightened suspicion that his presence in California was part of post-disappearance handling efforts. Next, the FBI retrieved pre- and post-disappearance financial reports and cross-referenced transactions on the ATM card in Lena's name. The California cash withdrawal occurred 5 days after Lena's disappearance, with no ATM video retained, but bank data confirmed the withdrawal took place at a branch just minutes' drive from Eric's 2002 registered temporary residence. The behavioral modeling system showed it was extremely rare for a victim to leave the state voluntarily without their car, without withdrawing cash in Colorado, without leaving travel evidence, yet randomly withdraw cash in California using their own card. From this, the algorithm assigned a high probability that the card was used by someone else. The FBI then re-obtained all 2001 witness statements, particularly neighbors' accounts of unusual noises around after 9 p.m. The accounts were inconsistent, but shared common elements of loud impacts and dragging sounds. When the timeline was simulated, the FBI noted the noises aligned precisely with the period for which Eric could provide no alibi. No witness saw Lena leave the apartment, but witnesses heard strange noises during the time she was believed to still be inside. The model concluded a high likelihood of an incident occurring inside the apartment. The FBI then evaluated Eric's level of cooperation, unstable statements, tendency to adjust details in response to questions, and much unverifiable information. In the behavioral analysis algorithm, this constituted an adaptive narrative pattern, an indicator commonly seen when a declarant attempts to maintain a story structure not grounded in actual events. Finally, the model synthesized all data into a suspect risk assessment table. Subject had last contact with victim, timing contradictions. No alibi evidence, presence near fake email IP location, potential motive, and inconsistent recounting behavior. The FBI's behavioral analysis conclusion placed Eric Donnelly in the primary suspect behavioral probability high category, meaning primary suspect with high probability of concealment behavior. Simultaneously, the model completely ruled out the hypothesis that Lena left Denver voluntarily due to no logical traces or physical data supporting it. For the first time in over 2 decades, the Lena Marquez disappearance case was determined to have a focused suspect based on objective data structure rather than solely on intuition or statements. After the FBI completed the behavioral analysis phase and identified Eric Donnelly as the primary suspect, the immediate next step was to obtain a search warrant in California, where Eric had resided from 2002 to the present. Based on the IP trace results, residency data, and timeline model showing Eric's direct involvement in sending the fake email, federal court approved a search warrant for his residence, authorizing seizure of all electronic devices, personal documents, and items potentially related to victim impersonation. When the FBI and local police execution team entered the apartment, Eric was not present, but his current partner stated he had left early that morning to go play golf. A detail irrelevant to the search process, but noted in the report because it coincided with the avoidance behavior pattern predicted by the analysis team. In the living room, bedroom, and small storage area adjacent to the kitchen, authorities sorted through all the storage boxes Eric had accumulated over 2 decades. One gray plastic bin on a low shelf, outwardly labeled "Old, Not Used," drew attention because it contained a jumble of items, old vehicle documents, bank receipts from the early 2000s, some obsolete electronics, and chargers of unclear origin. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a moisture-proof bag, the search team found an ivory-white Sony Vaio laptop, the same model line suggested by the metadata analysis system as the device used to send the 2001 email. The serial number on the underside matched an item report in the original file, where Lena's family had mentioned she brought an early model laptop for personal work when she first moved in with Eric. This laptop had never appeared in any of Eric's reports over 2 decades. After sealing and transporting it to the electronic forensics lab, data extraction began. Although the machine had not been used for years, the hard drive remained intact, allowing recovery of the original folder structure. Technicians immediately noticed many deleted files, some overwritten but most recoverable thanks to modern forensic technology. The recovered files fell into 3 main groups: unsent email drafts, Lena's personal notes, and several partially edited text files. In the email folder, the FBI found numerous drafts with content very different from the farewell email the family received in 2001. One of the most notable drafts mentioned Lena wanting to leave the apartment because she felt suffocated and unsafe, with phrasing implying Eric had become quick to anger and overly controlling. None of the drafts were sent, but the content showed Lena attempting to write to her family to share her concerns, completely contrary to the email Eric claimed she had sent from Panama or California in his conflicting statements over the years. In the personal notes folder, forensics found a file named Schedule 11_2001, recording Lena's personal plans before her disappearance. On November 17th, an entry detailed "Talk again with E about last night. Need to be more firm." The final line in the file, saved at 6:12 p.m. that day, consisted of exactly 3 words: "Not okay anymore." Other text files contained fragmented emotional writings in which Lena described multiple arguments with Eric, but without specifics. The FBI forwarded these files to the behavioral analysis team. When compared to Eric's statements in old interviews, a stark contrast emerged. Eric repeatedly asserted the relationship was completely normal, no serious arguments, and that Lena was thinking about changing her living environment. The electronic data from the laptop showed the opposite. The relationship was strained, Lena exhibited increasing anxiety, and she intended to have a decisive conversation on the very day she disappeared. More importantly, the hard drive contained a temporary file related to an email composer holding HTML code closely resembling the fake email the family received after Lena vanished. Although the file was incomplete and lacked main content, the file's internal header showed the device had been configured to send mail through a California ISP server, matching the metadata routing the FBI had previously traced. Among system folders, technicians also found a very small log entry recording a network reconfiguration of the device at the end of 2001, perfectly aligning with the date the fake email was sent. The likelihood that Lena's laptop was used by someone else to compose or attempt to compose the email was now considered extremely high. When correlating the personal note files, unsent email drafts, and system logs, the FBI concluded that the laptop was not merely indirect evidence, but could potentially reveal the full motive behind the conflict, a critical step toward understanding what happened on Lena's last seen day. The laptop's presence in Eric's storage box, carefully preserved for 2 decades and never disclosed, was assessed as an irregularity of serious magnitude. With these elements, the FBI immediately added the laptop to the category of key evidence. Although the recovered data did not yet provide a final conclusion, for the first time since 2001, the case file contained direct electronic evidence contradicting Eric's statements and showing the relationship was far more tense than previously reported. Nearly 3 months after the Sony Vaio laptop was seized and undergoing expanded analysis, an unexpected development occurred. The cold case office received a call from a resident who had lived in the same apartment complex as Lena and Eric in 2001, a person who had never previously been documented in the witness file. She now lives in Fort Collins and only learned the case had been reopened through a local news segment mentioning the FBI's search of a former suspect's property. When invited in for an official statement, she described a memory she considered never thought would be important. Yet 22 years later, it aligned strikingly with the data the FBI was trying to assemble into a complete picture. She recounted that in the early morning hours after the night Lena was recorded as missing, she remembered it was around 4 a.m. because she had just finished her night shift and returned home. She saw Eric heading to the parking area with a large-sized bag, resembling a duffel or sports equipment bag. She described him dragging the bag with both hands, his body slightly tilted, as if the contents were heavier than ordinary clothing. She also clearly recalled that Eric's car lights did not turn on immediately. He opened the trunk before getting into the driver's seat, something she at the time only thought was a bit odd, but did not connect to anything specific. When asked why she remembered this detail, after more than 2 decades, she explained that the apartment complex at the time had rules against leaving bulky items in hallways or parking areas, and she had intended to remind Eric, but he left too quickly. That image, a man apparently carrying something heavy to the parking lot in the pre-dawn hours, stuck in her memory even though she had no knowledge of what happened immediately afterward. When her statement was entered into the analysis system, the FBI immediately cross-referenced it with existing physical data in the file. The blurry 2001 parking lot camera had captured a figure of similar size to Eric moving through the frame, but the image quality at the time was insufficient to identify any bag or object he was carrying. Nevertheless, the witness's description of dragging the bag and the sideways leaning posture matched perfectly with the blurred motion in the camera footage that experts had previously deemed unanalyzable. Using modern image enhancement technology, the forensics team attempted to increase contrast to determine whether the figure in the video was carrying a large object. The results did not reveal a clear bag shape, but the enhanced outlines were sufficient to confirm that the man's lower body showed a shift in center of gravity, consistent with the witness's description of a weighted object. Another matching point was the direction of movement. The witness said Eric headed toward the north parking area, aligning with the old camera data recording motion from the hallway leading to that exact zone. This made the new statement extremely valuable because it provided a link that no prior report had documented. Eric left the apartment at a much earlier time than he had previously claimed. The new statement was also cross-checked against notes recovered from Lena's laptop. One of the restored files referenced a conflict last night, matching the day of disappearance. If the conflict occurred late in the evening, Eric's behavior of moving a large bag in the early morning became even more noteworthy. Additionally, the witness report was compared to the FBI's behavioral analysis model. The software had identified the time gap between 11:12 p.m. and 4 a.m. as a critical window for which Eric provided no alibi evidence. The witness appeared precisely within that time frame, supplying independent data reinforcing the assessment that Eric engaged in unusual activity that night and was highly likely directly connected to Lena's disappearance. For further verification, the FBI used biomechanical simulation technology to model heavy object transport, comparing the video motion to the witness description. The simulation results showed a high similarity ratio to cases involving a person carrying a long bag with heavy contents shifted to one side, rather than a normal backpack or handbag. This did not prove what the bag contained, but it ruled out a light bag. The witness was also asked about sounds in the area, an important factor because in 2001 there had been vague neighbor reports of strange noises. She stated she heard no screaming, but there was a sound of something heavy hitting the stairs as Eric dragged the bag along the walkway. This detail had never appeared in any prior statement and aligned with the FBI hypothesis that a significant incident inside the apartment may have led to the immediate nighttime removal of an object. When all data was input into the witness credibility evaluation system, the algorithm returned a high compatibility score with physical evidence, and the statement showed no signs of fabrication. More importantly, the witness's observation position, second-floor window overlooking the walkway, matched the angle the blurry camera could not cover, creating a rare supplemental viewpoint in a file lacking direct witnesses. The emergence of this witness after 22 years not only added a crucial puzzle piece, but also validated the investigative direction the FBI was pursuing. Eric exhibited behavior of transporting a heavy object out of the apartment precisely within the time frame of Lena's disappearance. For the first time since 2001, investigators had an independent statement directly supporting the conclusion that Lena's disappearance could not have been voluntary departure, but must have involved intervention by another person, and that person, based on all current data, was Eric Donnelly. While the new witness statement was integrated into the behavioral model, the cold case team simultaneously reopened all 2001 physical evidence for re-examination using modern forensic technology, including carpet samples and felt materials seized from Eric's vehicle when he voluntarily allowed inspection to cooperate with the investigation. In 2001, these samples yielded no results, because no clear biological traces were detected and analytical equipment was limited. However, with 2023 advanced mass spectrometry and liquid chromatography, reanalysis could produce entirely different outcomes. The floor mat sample, particularly the section near the rear door where the witness described Eric opening the trunk in the early morning, was prioritized for testing. When the sample was analyzed, technicians noticed a very faint discoloration, not visible to the naked eye, but clearly apparent under 415 nanometers wavelength light. The discoloration did not exhibit the streaking pattern of blood or bodily fluids, but showed an abnormal molecular structure that prompted the forensics team to run more detailed chemical analysis. Initial gas chromatography results revealed the presence of compounds in the alkyl-benzene sulfonate group, a common component in industrial cleaners, capable of breaking down protein traces, typically not found in ordinary household cleaners. Subsequent infrared spectroscopy detected additional traces of dimethylsulfone and ethoxylate, two substances commonly present in strong cleaning solutions used to treat blood-contaminated surfaces before reuse or vehicle cleaning. When compared to control samples from clean mats seized from vehicles of the same make and year, the forensics team clearly saw differences. Eric's vehicle mat had cleaning compound levels many times higher than baseline, indicating it had undergone intensive chemical cleaning. Notably, other mat samples in the vehicle interior, front seats, driver's floor and spare tire well showed no abnormal chemical concentrations like the area near the rear door. This led the forensics team to conclude that the cleaning activity was not routine maintenance, but focused on a specific zone, as if someone had attempted to remove a quantity of material capable of leaving biological traces without cleaning the entire interior. This aligned significantly with the witness statement about Eric dragging a bag to the vehicle in the early morning. When the FBI simulated potential contamination from a bag containing a heavy object, the model showed the most vulnerable contamination point was precisely the rear door edge, the exact area where strong cleaning chemicals were detected. Next, the forensics team conducted LC-MS analysis to determine whether degraded hemoglobin traces were present. Although no intact blood was found, the system detected low-level heme degradation precursors, a common occurrence when blood traces have been repeatedly cleaned but original molecules remain embedded in the felt fibers. Due to the high degree of degradation, analysts could not assign a personal biological identification, but the mere presence of this compound directly contradicted Eric's old statement that he rarely used the trunk and never cleaned the interior with strong chemicals. In parallel, the FBI reviewed Eric's 2001 credit card purchase history. One transaction previously deemed unrelated, a purchase of cleaning supplies at a small auto repair shop in Lakewood the morning after Lena's disappearance, now became noteworthy. The shop sold industrial cleaning solutions containing alkyl benzene sulfonate, the same compound just found in the vehicle mat. This result was then fed into the behavioral matching algorithm, chemical purchase data, contradictory statements, cleaning trace location, and heavy object transport activity all aligned in the timeline. Most critically, modern technology transformed a mat sample once considered worthless in 2001 into key evidence supporting the hypothesis that Lena was harmed before disappearing. In a case spanning more than 2 decades, the detection of industrial cleaner traces and biological degradation precursors in the exact suspect area of Eric's vehicle brought the entire investigative line one major step closer. While it could not directly conclude what happened, it definitively refuted any argument that the vehicle had never been used for unusual activity. This was the first clear physical evidence of intentional trace removal, an extremely important factor in suspected body concealment missing persons cases. When the vehicle evidence analysis from Eric's car yielded strong indicators of cleanup behavior on the night Lena disappeared, the investigative team determined it was time to expand body recovery efforts using modern techniques unavailable in 2001. Clear Creek Canyon, where Lena frequently visited and had been preliminarily searched without results, was selected as the primary focus because the FBI behavioral model still rated it as high probability, about 35 minutes drive from the apartment complex, rugged terrain ideal for concealing traces, and consistent with the time gap in Eric's statements. The second search operation was organized on a much larger scale than in 2001, mobilizing special search teams, forensic geologists, drone technicians, and ground-penetrating radar systems. The initial phase was aerial survey. The drone team deployed 3 high-resolution thermal imaging UAVs capable of detecting subtle surface temperature anomalies. Even after more than 2 decades, small temperature differences could be identified between naturally compacted soil and areas previously excavated deeply, especially in the dry, cold mountainous environment of Clear Creek Canyon. Drones were programmed to fly a grid pattern divided into 20x20-meter cells, ensuring no area within the suspect radius was missed. After more than 3 hours of continuous scanning, the thermal image analysis system returned 3 anomalous temperature zones. Each showed a cold spot beneath a thin soil layer, approximately 1.5 to 2 meters wide, not coinciding with trails or natural erosion zones. Experts stated these were potential signs of old backfilled burial pits, as disturbed soil structures tend to retain heat less effectively than natural ground. From the drone data, the search team identified 2 high-priority points, one near a side branch of Clear Creek, the other about 50 meters from an old trail. However, to ensure accuracy before requesting an excavation warrant, the forensics team deployed GPR next-generation ground-penetrating radar capable of mapping soil layers up to 5 meters deep, providing cross-sectional images of subsurface structures. The device was towed along parallel lines around the suspect zones, with each pass recording data on soil density, compaction, sediment layer disruptions, and anomalous object shapes. GPR results at the first location showed a distinctly different soil compaction layer compared to adjacent areas, with boundary layers forming an oval shape approximately 1.6 meters long and 0.8 meters deep. This was a typical structure of a hand-dug pit, later backfilled without long-term natural compaction. Additionally, GPR detected a strong signal reflection zone at the pit bottom interruption, possibly non-soil material such as fabric, nylon, or buried items. Results at the second location also showed disturbed soil, but the structure was less defined and could be natural. The FBI rated the first location as having the highest forensic value, especially when cross-referenced with the behavioral model. The area lay within a range accessible by vehicle, followed by a short walk to avoid attention, and was adjacent to an unofficial parking spot used in the early 2000s. GPR data was sent to the Forensic Geology Lab for confirmation reporting. The report concluded that the soil structure at the suspect point is consistent with a burial pit dating from many years ago, and no natural factors explain the scan results. This provided critical basis for the next step, obtaining an official excavation warrant. Before submitting the application, the investigative team performed cross-verification. They matched the suspect point coordinates with Eric's movement data from that period. Although personal GPS was not widespread in 2001, credit card records showed Eric purchased gasoline at a station near the Clear Creek Canyon entrance the morning after the disappearance. A detail previously overlooked for lack of supporting data, but now highly significant in the new context. Moreover, when the behavioral model was updated with the suspect location data, the algorithm's probability linkage between Eric's activity and this site increased markedly, elevating Clear Creek from area of interest to primary excavation target. At this point, drones were redeployed for nighttime flights to reconfirm thermal signals. Results remained stable, showing the suspect ground consistently had lower surface temperature than surroundings, consistent with excavated and backfilled soil. The FBI also deployed handheld seismic sensors to check subsurface voids at the suspect location, with collected data further reinforcing the presence of non-uniform subsurface structure. To finalize the warrant application file, the investigative team compiled all elements: the new statement about Eric's early morning heavy bag transport, vehicle cleaning chemical traces, thermal drone results, GPR mapping, gasoline purchase data, and behavioral model. The combination of modern technologies, none of which existed or were sufficiently developed in 2001, transformed an area once deemed nothing there into the strongest suspect point in the entire case. By the end of the day, the team marked the location with GPS coordinates, photographed the scene, and prepared a legal report detailing all obtained results. The clear objective: secure an excavation warrant to verify whether traces of Lena Marquez lay beneath the disturbed soil, traces that could alter the entire investigative direction and break more than 2 decades of silence. When the Clear Creek Canyon data was added to the system, the FBI decided to proceed with the next step in the reinvestigation protocol, constructing a criminal profile to describe the suspect's behavior, motive, and concealment capabilities based on the full chain of facts gathered over more than 2 decades. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, began by reconstructing a post-offense model, actions occurring after the presumed commission of the crime. They examined the suspect's consecutive behaviors within 48 hours after Lena's disappearance. Contradictory statements about departure time, transporting a heavy bag to the vehicle in the early morning, purchasing industrial cleaning supplies, and completing localized vehicle cleanup, along with silence regarding his movements that night. These elements were simulated within a post-offense cleanup framework, and the algorithm assessed a high match probability for intentional evidence handling behavior. Next, BAU analyzed potential motive. From Lena's laptop, unsent email drafts and personal notes showed escalating conflict between the two, with Lena expressing fear and intent for a decisive conversation on the very day she disappeared. This matched the typical pattern in domestic violence cases, escalating to homicide, intensifying disputes, loss of control risk, and a final triggering event leading to violent behavior. The data also showed the suspect's controlling tendencies, including accessing the victim's email account and fabricating a message to the family to frame the narrative as voluntary departure, a characteristic commonly noted in profiling of long-term body concealment cases. BEO then modeled the suspect's body disposal capabilities, based on thermal drone and ground-penetrating radar analysis showing disturbed soil of size consistent with a hand-dug pit. Experts assessed that the suspect had made minimal preparation but possessed basic terrain knowledge, selecting a low-traffic area, accessible by vehicle, and convenient for quick burial. This fit the opportunistic disposal site model, where the perpetrator chooses a location not overly distant but sufficiently secluded for long-term concealment. When combined with the suspect's departure from Colorado shortly after the disappearance and relocation to California, BEO identified a very clear pattern. After handling evidence and fabricating a story, the suspect distanced himself from the primary scene to reduce re-examination risk. This is a common trait in cases where the perpetrator believes they have successfully established a victim left voluntarily context. The next step was assessing the suspect's intelligence and organizational skills. While using a fake email and the victim's laptop demonstrated efforts to manipulate others' perceptions, the evidence handling techniques were not sophisticated. Only localized vehicle matte cleaning, unaware that cleaning compounds leave traces, failure to fully address email metadata, and irreconcilable timeline conflicts. These errors led BEO to conclude the suspect fits an organized-disorganized hybrid type, planned but lacking expertise, resulting in numerous exploitable gaps for reconstruction after 2 decades. Finally, the synthesized model was compared to Eric's personal history, relationship background, personality traits, responses in old interviews, post-disappearance movement behavior, progressively low cooperation, and statements adjusted to fit investigative pressure. When the full matching table was run, BEO concluded a very high similarity ratio between the hypothesized perpetrator behavior and Eric Donnelly, particularly across 3 main criteria: instinctive concealment capability, urgent but unprofessional evidence handling, and prolonged maintenance of a false narrative over many years. The data also showed no other individual in the file scope exhibited behavior fitting the potential perpetrator model. The profiling results became a key component of the legal report, reinforcing the basis that Eric was not only the last person to see Lena, but also the subject whose post-offense behavior matched the complete psychological profile of someone intentionally concealing a crime in a missing persons case. This was the final necessary piece for the investigative agency to move to the next phase of the file. The second interview with Eric Donnelly was arranged at the FBI office in Denver after the investigative team had gathered sufficient new evidence to proceed with direct confrontation, and this time it was no longer exploratory, as in 2001, but shifted entirely to a psychological pressure strategy based on forensics. Eric arrived appearing calm but rigid, hands clasped tightly, and eyes repeatedly darting toward the door, as if assessing an escape route. When the session began, the lead agent presented a neatly arranged series of documents on the table: printed email metadata, recovered images from the Sony Vaio laptop, a summary of the vehicle matte analysis results, and GPR images from Clear Creek Canyon. Eric tried to force a strained smile, but his expression changed almost immediately when the agent announced that the FBI had traced the IP address of the 2001 email, confirming the sending source was in Dana Point, California, precisely where Eric resided after leaving Colorado. He instinctively reacted by insisting that someone could have hacked it, but the agent was prepared. The metadata clearly indicated the email client and configuration matching the Sony Vaio laptop found in Eric's storage box, which he had never disclosed before. At this point, Eric began fidgeting constantly, leaning back in his chair then sitting upright again, a signal the behavioral analyst noted as sudden stress. The agent continued by opening the laptop and showing Eric the recovered files, unsent email drafts from Lena expressing fear and conflict in the relationship on the day she disappeared. Eric immediately denied ever seeing those files before, but the agent emphasized the digital fingerprint in the system showing the laptop had been accessed multiple times in the days following November 17, 2001. When Eric did not respond, the agent moved to the timeline, a two-column printout placed in front of him, one side his 2001 statement timeline, the other the 2023 reconstructed timeline based on cameras, access card data, the new witness statement, and behavioral modeling. Each contradictory timestamp was pointed out. Eric claimed he left the apartment at 10:30 p.m., while the access card logged activity at 11:12 p.m. He said he drove out and returned at 1 a.m., while the parking lot camera recorded no vehicle movement during that entire period. He claimed he didn't remember carrying anything to the car, but the new witness clearly described him dragging a heavy bag around 4 a.m. As these data points were laid side by side, the agents observed Eric's jaw beginning to twitch slightly, a common reaction when a subject is cornered without a plausible defense. At this stage, the agent shifted to forensic evidence, the vehicle mat analysis results showing the presence of industrial cleaner and heme degradation precursors, not traces from ordinary household cleaning as Eric had claimed. He immediately countered by tilting his head and saying, "I cleaned the car because I spilled food," but the agent explained that alkyl benzene sulfonate and dimethyl sulfone molecules are not components of typical household cleaners. They are sold only at specialized auto shops, matching Eric's credit card transaction that very morning. Upon hearing this, Eric's face paled and his palms began rubbing together vigorously, a sign of emerging panic. The agent pressed further by presenting the GPR images from Clear Creek Canyon, an oval-shaped disturbed soil structure matching the size of an adult burial pit, along with anomalous bottom reflections. Eric stared at the photos, no longer able to maintain his feigned composure. The agent asked if he had anything to explain about purchasing gas near Clear Creek the morning after the disappearance. But Eric remained silent, eyes dropping to the table and breathing becoming shallow. This shift was clearly noted, body leaning forward, hands clasped tightly, mouth moving without forming words, a classic sign of a subject cornered into being unable to explain with old statements. The agent then combined all the facts into a single question: which part of this evidence is random coincidence according to you? A tactic designed to force the suspect to evaluate the whole rather than respond point by point. Eric closed his eyes for several seconds, facial muscles contracting, showing psychological pressure had reached a threshold where rational defense was no longer possible. When he opened his eyes, he did not answer the question but resorted to repeating meaningless phrases like, "I don't know. I don't remember." A hallmark response when an individual senses the collapse of a story maintained for many years. The agents ended the interview upon observing Eric's psychological state deteriorating rapidly. They did not need a confession at that moment, only to document the reaction level for the behavioral file and prepare for the next legal step. The confrontation session concluded with Eric leaving the interview room in a stunned state, shoulders slumped, footsteps slow and disoriented, a sign that the structure of statements he had clung to for over 2 decades had been seriously shaken by the full weight of the newly presented evidence. In parallel with the second interview, the electronic forensics team continued deep dives into the Sony Vaio hard drive and devices seized from the California residents, using next-generation data recovery tools capable of reconstructing even heavily overwritten fragments from over 2 decades. During the scan of unallocated space on the hard drive, where traces of long-deleted files reside, the system detected a chain of fragments with browser-like structure, including URL segments, keywords, and damaged timestamps. When reconstructed using web behavior recovery algorithms, the forensics team recognized this as browsing history occurring within approximately 36 hours after Lena was reported missing. Most data was too degraded for full recovery, but several keywords remained clear. Clean blood from carpet, remove stains car trunk. industrial cleaner protein residue, how long blood smell lasts, and dispose of large item at night. Timestamps indicated these queries were made from an old Internet Explorer version, the exact type bundled with the operating system on 2001 Sony Vaio laptops. This created a critical match. The deleted keywords not only directly related to forensic findings on Eric's vehicle, but also aligned with the timeline the investigative team identified as the period he handled evidence. To confirm this was not noise from another device, the forensics team checked browser identification strings in the data fragments. The chain matched the configuration of the Vaio laptop itself, the device the FBI determined had been used to send the fake email to Lena's family. Thus, if this laptop belonged to Lena as the original file asserted, its use to search for ways to remove blood traces immediately after her disappearance became an extremely strong indicator of post-offense behavior. The investigative team expanded the scan by searching related phrases across other deleted data regions and discovered an additional deleted temporary file containing fragmented text lines, "Clean trunk tonight. Don't forget gloves, and use stronger solvent." Although it could not be determined whether this file was a note or part of an email draft, its content, combined with the browsing history, painted a clear picture the victim's device had been used to plan concealment actions, completely contradicting Eric's account that he never touched Lena's laptop after she disappeared. To solidify the link, the forensics team reanalyzed the laptop's system logs and found traces showing the device was powered on multiple times throughout the night. Lena disappeared, and the following morning. This data aligned with the new witness's time frame for Eric transporting a heavy bag to the vehicle around 4 a.m., as well as with the industrial cleaner purchase transaction that same morning. As all analyses converged in one direction, the FBI's legal team began preparing the arrest warrant file first, establishing a direct link between the suspect and blood removal-related searches. Next, concluding from forensics that the detected cleaning agents in the vehicle matched the instructions in the search history, and finally showing the behavioral model that Eric's actions aligned with the recorded sequence. Searching, purchasing chemicals, treating the vehicle matte, transporting a heavy object. While the file was finalized, BAU added a psychological assessment based on Eric's reactions during the second interview. His descent into speech disarray, loss of control over responses, and inability to maintain a consistent narrative reinforced the conclusion that the subject was facing intense internal pressure as the truth was exposed. These data points were used to demonstrate that the suspect was not only deceptive in his statements, but behaved exactly like someone whose layers of concealment were being peeled away. In the final report prepared for the federal prosecutor, investigators asserted that the blood-related search behavior could only occur if the suspect had direct contact with the crime scene or the victim's biological traces. More importantly, this search history predated the sending of the fake email, proving the concealment process began very early and was not a random or reactive event after learning of Lena's disappearance. With each layer of evidence closing the 2001 timeline gaps, the legal file for Eric Donnelly's arrest warrant was completed, grounded in a robust combination of forensics, behavior, device data, and contradictory statements, strong enough to shift the case from suspicion to full legal basis for coercive action. Once the legal file was finalized and all key evidence from the laptop, search history, vehicle cleanup traces, to GPR data at Clear Creek Canyon, was confirmed by the federal investigative system to meet the criminal prosecution threshold. An arrest warrant for Eric Donnelly was approved by the Department of Justice on 3 primary charges: tampering with physical evidence, obstruction of justice, and identity fraud. The warrant was immediately forwarded to the FBI Los Angeles field office, where Eric was temporarily residing. To minimize the risk of the suspect fleeing or self-harming upon learning the case had reached the enforcement stage, the tactical team was deployed in the early morning hours, the time when suspects are least alert. As agents approached the residence, Eric had just stepped out the door carrying a golf bag, an eerily matching image to the activity he had routinely performed for 2 decades since leaving Colorado, as if a habit of evasion. He froze the moment he saw the tactical team in front of him and a single concise statement from the lead agent. "Eric Donnelly, you are under federal arrest," was enough to cause his body to slump, hands dropping limply, the golf bag hitting the floor with a dry thud. Handcuffs were secured on his wrists right in the apartment hallway, with no resistance. But his face showed long-suppressed panic. Eyes glassy, lips trembling, breathing rapid. As the agent read each charge aloud, Eric did not respond with the confident denial seen in prior investigative phases. Instead, he repeated, "I don't understand," in a shaky voice, even though all evidence had clearly been confronted in the previous interview. During the emergency search authorized by the warrant, agents seized additional cell phones, a tablet, and several storage boxes hidden under the bed. These items were immediately sealed for transfer to the Denver Forensics Lab, though no breakthrough traces were found at the scene. After being cuffed, Eric was escorted to the agent's vehicle and transported to the nearest airport for transfer to Denver, the place where the case began and where he would now face the full accumulated chain of evidence over more than 2 decades. On the flight, the accompanying agent's report noted Eric in a dazed state, eyes unfocused, occasionally clenching his hands as if trying to self-soothe. He asked no questions about the reason for arrest, no questions about legal rights, and made no request for an attorney at that time. A psychological state commonly seen when a subject realizes the entire concealment structure has collapsed. Upon landing in Denver, Eric was taken directly to federal detention and processed according to procedure. Photographs, fingerprints, identity verification, and placement in an isolation unit for major investigation suspects. An expanded interrogation had been scheduled, but not conducted immediately. The investigative team wanted Eric's psychological state stable enough to yield information, but not stable enough for him to reconstruct a new false narrative. This arrest warrant was not merely legal, it marked the transition from cold case file to active criminal prosecution, where the suspect was no longer on the periphery, but at the center of the investigation. And more importantly, it was the first time since 2001 that authorities had full control over the suspect, forcing him to confront what had been hidden for over 2 decades. In the first interrogation session, after being transported back to Denver, Eric Donnelly was brought into the interview room with 2 FBI agents and 1 Lakewood investigator who had worked the 2001 file, forming a combined structure of old experience and new data. Eric sat with his head bowed, wrists on the table, the room's energy frozen, as the agent began by opening a thick file containing all of Eric's 2001 statements. There was no gentle opening. The interrogation went straight to the core, the discrepancies between what Eric had once claimed and what forensics had proven. The agent read aloud passages from the old statements. He said he left the apartment at 10:30 p.m. He said Lena was awake and wanted to be alone. He said he drove out for a few hours and returned at 1 a.m. Then, the agent placed beside it a 2023 compiled timeline summary. Access card logged the apartment door at 11:12 p.m. Parking lot camera recorded no vehicle movement from his car. The new witness confirmed seeing him drag a heavy bag around 4 a.m. And forensic reports showed the vehicle had been cleaned that same day. As these facts were displayed on a small screen in the interview room, Eric lifted his eyes, scanning each detail disjointedly before immediately looking away. The agent asked him to explain why the time he claimed to have left did not match the access card data. Eric replied with the familiar phrase, "I don't remember." When pressed further about the lack of evidence for vehicle movement all night, he answered, "Maybe the camera was broken." The agent calmly showed him the technical report, proving the camera was functioning normally and had captured other vehicle movements that night. Eric fell silent, hands intertwined, knuckles white from gripping. Next, the agent presented the vehicle forensics data. Industrial cleaner, cleaning pattern inconsistent with routine maintenance, and presence of heme degradation precursors indicating biological traces had been processed. The agent asked, "What did you clean in the car the next morning?" Eric looked down at the table and whispered, "I spilled food with sauce." The agent did not respond, but moved to the chemical analysis results. The solution found in the vehicle was not in household cleaners and had been purchased the morning after the disappearance. The contradictions continued to be highlighted. Eric said he carried nothing to the car that night, but the witness described him with a heavy bag. He said he never touched Lena's laptop after she disappeared, but forensics showed it was powered on multiple times, had search history on blood removal, and was used to send the fake email. The agent asked, "Do you want to revise your statement about not using that laptop?" Eric clenched his hands, trembling slightly, but only said, "No." Another agent emphasized that refusing to explain the discrepancies would be noted in the file and presented to the federal prosecutor. At this point, Eric began breathing heavily, body leaning slightly forward as if struggling to maintain emotional balance. The agent continued, "If you didn't handle blood traces, why is search history related to blood removal on the victim's laptop? Why was the email sent from her device originating from where you lived months after her disappearance?" Eric did not answer. Eyes reddening, staring fixedly at the corner of the wall as if wanting to escape the situation. The agent concluded with the GPR data from Clear Creek Canyon, describing the excavated soil structure matching adult human body size, explaining why the FBI believed his actions that night were directly related to concealing Lena's body. When asked for a response, Eric only repeated, "I have nothing to say." The silence stretched for several minutes afterward, and though no confession was offered, the investigators clearly noted that Eric no longer denied vigorously as in previous years. He offered no alternative version, made no attempt to build a new story, but sank into confusion and deadlock. The interrogation ended with the agent informing him that the file would proceed to prosecution, and this was his only opportunity to clarify the contradictions in his statements. Eric did not react, remaining motionless as the agents left the room, a state indicating the pressure from forensic confrontation had shattered most of the psychological defense structure he had maintained for over 2 decades. The second interrogation session was conducted after nearly 24 hours to create a psychological delay, a technique that helps the subject gradually break down when isolated from familiar surroundings. When Eric was brought back to the interview room, his demeanor had changed markedly from the previous session, shoulders slumped, eyes unfocused, movements slow and hesitant. The FBI immediately deployed the progressive disclosure strategy, revealing information layer by layer, not disclosing all evidence at once, but peeling back key portions gradually, so Eric would increasingly realize the space for denial was shrinking. The agent began in a neutral tone, stating that some new forensic evidence was still under further analysis, and they wanted Eric's response before it was fully released. Although the investigative team already possessed most results, the bluff evidence tactic was crucial at this point, creating the impression that the FBI had more than what they were revealing. Eric reacted immediately by clenching his fists and asking what other evidence, a reflexive response showing he now perceived the threat from the forensic findings. The agent did not answer directly, but instead recounted the suspected steps in the evidence handling timeline on the night of the disappearance. No accusations, just description. The apartment door opening at 11:12 p.m., no vehicle leaving the lot at 1 a.m. The witness seeing him at 4 a.m. and purchasing industrial cleaner the next morning. When the agent asked, "Which part of this would you like to revise first?" Eric shook his head, lips trembling, and said softly, I'm not sure anymore." This was the first time in 2 decades he did not reaffirm his old statement. Sensing this crack, the agent continued to build pressure by revealing a small portion of the bluff evidence tactic. They stated the forensic system had recovered more than expected from the laptop and Eric's personal devices, including a temporary note file containing clean trunk tonight, and used stronger solvent. In reality, the FBI had recovered nothing additional beyond what was already known. But this ambiguous information pushed Eric into disorganized defense, rapid blinking, fingers lightly scratching the table edge, leaning as if wanting to stand but not daring to. Another agent, a psychological interrogation specialist, took the understanding role, softening his voice and offering a hypothetical scenario. When two people argue, if things spiral out of control and an accident happens, people often panic. They clean up. They hide. That doesn't sound like a deliberate plan. You could help us understand what led to that chain of events. This was a technique to lower the suspect's perceived level of culpability, offering a psychological escape from the most severe crime category. Eric looked up for the first time since the session began. His eyes were red and vacant, displaying the breakpoint state the BAU experts had predicted. The agent kept pressing by stating that Clear Creek Canyon is being processed and results could come very soon. Even without excavation yet, this suggestive phrasing created the feeling that Eric no longer had time to evade. Immediately, he shifted posture, placed both hands on his forehead, elbows on the table, body contracting as if trying to suppress an inner impulse. The agent deliberately fell silent for nearly a minute, a silent pressure technique forcing the subject to fill the void with words. And as predicted, Eric began speaking. Not a direct answer, but fragmented self-defense. I didn't mean to. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I just wanted everything to be quiet. The agent seized on this. You said not intentional. So what happened? But Eric did not answer directly, only continued. If you already have everything, then I have nothing left to say except things went too far. This was a highly significant indicator, an indirect admission that the FBI had correctly matched his behavior. The agent added another layer of pressure. Do you realize we've seen the disturbed soil area, the right size, the right location within the time frame you could have reached it? Do you want to tell us yourself what's down there, or let us find out? Eric immediately leaned forward, hands shaking strongly. He whispered, I didn't know what to do at that moment. Though still evasive, this was the pivotal turning point. Eric no longer used I wasn't involved as before, but shifted to a post-event deadlock structure, a classic post-offense guilt pattern per BAU assessment. The agent maintained strategic silence, allowing Eric to venture further into confession territory without direct coercion. Eric buried his face in his hands and spoke haltingly. I just wanted it to disappear. I had no other choice. This statement was fully recorded and entered into the minutes because it demonstrated consciousness of concealing a crime, a critical charging element. Although Eric had not yet clearly stated what happened, the agents all understood he had crossed the denial threshold and was now in a psychological state ready to reveal more under appropriate conditions. The session was ended precisely at the peak of his instability to prevent him from rebuilding his defensive shell. Leaving the interview room, he staggered, breathing ragged, his demeanor clearly showing that his ability to maintain the old statement had completely collapsed. The third interrogation session took place the following afternoon. At the exact time the FBI psychologist determined Eric Donnelly was in the post-collapse psychological state, the phase most conducive to confession. When he entered the room, Eric appeared unsteady, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, hands clasped as if trying to hold on to the last remnants of composure. The agent did not apply pressure immediately, but began with a single question. You said yesterday that things went too far. Help us understand what that means. Silence stretched for nearly half a minute before Eric spoke, and for the first time in 2 decades, he did not resort to, I don't remember. He spoke softly, voice hoarse and halting. It wasn't intentional, we argued. She wanted to leave me that very night, she said. She would move out the next day, and that everything was over. He paused, swallowed hard before continuing. I lost control. I don't know why I did it. I pushed her. She fell next to the table. Her head hit the table edge, and she didn't get up. The agent asked for clearer description, but without rushing. letting Eric follow the suppressed memory flow he had tried to bury for nearly 22 years. He recounted that after the fall, he called Lena's name with no response, and in seconds of panic, he tried to shake her awake, but she wasn't breathing. He said, "I panicked. I thought if I called the police they would say I did it on purpose. I thought my life would be over." When asked what happened next, Eric covered half his face with his hand and said, "I wiped the floor. I tried to wipe the stain on the carpet too. I pulled her into the largest gym bag. I didn't know what else to do." This detail perfectly matched the witness statement about the large bag he dragged to the parking area in the early morning. The agent asked how he got the body out without being seen. Eric replied that he waited until nearly 4 a.m., when the hallway was quietest, then dragged the bag down each stair, out to the car, and opened the trunk. He said, "I thought someone was watching. I thought everyone knew, but no one appeared." When asked why he used strong chemicals to clean the car, Eric no longer denied, but nodded, eyes down. "The bag leaked. I saw blood. I didn't know what to do. I went to the store and bought the strongest thing they had." He described driving out of Denver while it was still dark, heading along Highway 6, because it was an area Lena liked, and he thought no one would notice a car parked there early morning. Regarding the chosen location, Eric said, "I walked off the main trail. I found a spot no one could see. I dug by hand. The soil was soft from the night dew." The agent placed a marked map of Clear Creek Canyon in front of him based on drone and GPR data. When the map was turned toward him, Eric stared for several seconds, then pointed a trembling finger exactly at the location where ground-penetrating radar had shown disturbed soil structure. "Right here," he said, voice choking. "I don't remember every meter exactly, but this is where I stopped. This is where I put her down." He described the pit about a meter deep, covered with soil, rocks, and pine needles, then returning to the car in panic, feeling as if being followed even though no one was there. Finally, when asked why he sent the fake email impersonating Lena, Eric admitted, "I wanted people to think she left. I didn't want anyone to look. I thought that way it would disappear." He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. "I was wrong. I was wrong." The confession ended in heavy silence. The agents needed no further prompting. Eric had precisely identified the suspect location, described details matching all forensic clues, and confirmed the entire concealment sequence the FBI had reconstructed after 2 decades. This was the statement the file had lacked for 22 years, a horrific but coherent truth, paving the way for the next critical step. Early the next morning after the confession was recorded, the FBI Terrain Forensics team, along with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, deployed to Clear Creek Canyon to excavate at the exact location Eric Donnelly had pointed out. The area was cordoned off in a wide radius, tarps erected to shield from mountain winds and preserve the long-buried scene as much as possible. As the surface soil was carefully removed, layer by thin layer using forensic trowels and soft brushes, less than an hour in, technicians detected a clear change in soil texture, looser compaction, darker color, and uneven decomposed pine needle fragments, precisely as indicated in the GPR data. At approximately 70 centimeters depth, a dark fabric fragment appeared, decayed but still recognizable as thick material from a gym bag, consistent with Eric's statement about using a large bag to transport the body. As surrounding soil was cleared further, arm bones, forearm bones, and rib fragments emerged in the contracted position typical of a body placed in confined space. The entire area was photographed, 3D scanned, and marked before excavation continued. Near the pit bottom, forensics also recovered a small metal bracelet, a silver zipper fragment, and fabric pieces from a jacket the family confirmed Lena wore at the time of disappearance. All evidence was carefully collected, placed in sealed containers, and transported to the lab. Skeletal reconstruction showed a long cranial fracture in the temporal region, a blunt force injury consistent with the head striking a table edge as Eric described. No additional post-mortem violence was detected, no evidence of weapon use, no cuts or stabs, all consistent with a fall causing fatal head trauma. For identification, bone samples were sent to the Colorado State Forensic DNA Lab. Using next-generation DNA sequencing, the bone sample was profiled and compared to Lena's mother's DNA sample collected in the early 2000s. Results returned within 48 hours, 99.9998% match, confirming the remains were those of Lena Marquez, missing since November 2001. When the results report reached the prosecutor's office, the case file was immediately reclassified from suspicious disappearance to homicide, intentional concealment. Although Eric's statement framed the incident as an accident during conflict, his active concealment of the body, cleanup of blood traces, vehicle treatment, fake email, out-of-state body transport, and silence for over 2 decades led to classification under intentional criminal concealment, resulting in serious criminal charges. The bracelet, fabric, gym bag and excavation site were presented in the report as corroborating evidence, while the cranial injury and body position matched Eric's description of the fall and subsequent handling. For the first time in 22 years, Lena Marquez was officially determined deceased, and the truth documented with full forensic evidence, rather than remaining in an unresolved missing persons file. The case not only changed its legal nature, but moved to the final phase, criminal prosecution of Eric Donnelly, on all charges related to Lena's death and body concealment. The 2023 trial of Eric Donnelly in Denver became a major legal event, drawing significant attention, not only as the trial of a homicide, but as the reenactment of an investigative chain, spanning more than 2 decades, a journey of forensics, digital analysis, behavioral profiling, and financial tracing interwoven, presented by the prosecution to the jury as a seamless picture where every small fragment played an essential role. On opening day, the prosecutor outlined the 2001 disappearance, emphasizing that when Lena Marquez vanished, there were no physical traces, no clear witnesses, and technology at the time insufficient to trace the fake email origin or analyze cleaning chemicals in the vehicle. However, the prosecution stated the case was resolved not by a single decisive piece of evidence, but by a chain of disjointed fragments over 22 years, each insufficient alone, but when combined with modern science, forming a unified evidentiary structure that clarified Eric's actions on the night Lena disappeared and in the years that followed. The main presentation spanned several days, with investigators, forensic experts, data analysts, and cold case team members taking the stand to present each layer of evidence. First came the 2001 sequence. Eric's initial statements, parking lot camera showing no vehicle movement from his car, the apartment showing no forced entry, and neighbors' vague reports of unusual noises. The prosecutor stressed that these elements alone were insufficient for conclusion, but formed the context for understanding why the case stalled for years. Next, the prosecution guided the jury to the 2020 file digitization phase, where the single email once viewed as evidence Lena was alive turned into incriminating proof. A digital forensics expert explained the metadata structure, IP from Dana Point, California, email client matching the Sony Vaio laptop, anomalous timestamp deviation, and complete mismatch with Lena's genuine pre-disappearance emails. The jury viewed direct visual comparisons between Lena's real email metadata and the fake 2001 email, proving it could not have been sent by the victim. Then another expert presented the vehicle mat analysis, traces of industrial cleaning compounds, heme degradation precursors, and modeling showing how a heavy bag containing a body could have contaminated the mat area. Financial evidence followed. Purchase of specialized cleaning solution the morning after the disappearance. Lena's ATM transaction in California occurring just before Eric relocated there, with no evidence Lena ever left Denver. The prosecution emphasized that the ATM transaction did not prove the victim was alive, but proved the card was used by someone with access to her belongings. To clarify body transport behavior, the jury heard the 22-year late witness statement, seeing Eric drag a heavy bag around 4 a.m. The witness testified in court, recounting the pre-dawn scene and withstanding cross-examination by defense counsel, yet her statement remained consistent with forensic data and the 2001 blurry camera footage. Next, the prosecution presented the most breakthrough evidence, GPR maps and thermal drone images from Clear Creek Canyon showing disturbed soil matching human burial size, plus 3D excavation site images perfectly aligning with Eric's pointed location. A forensic expert detailed the decomposed gym bag fragments, bone positioning, cranial injury matching the described fall, and personal items recovered from the pit. DNA evidence was presented as the final confirmation step. The analyst stated the bone DNA matched Lena's mother's sample at 99.9998%, leaving no reasonable doubt. One of the heaviest portions of the trial was the behavioral analysis unit presentation. They explained to the jury how they modeled post-offense behavior, purchasing cleaner localized vehicle cleanup, fake email, immediate out-of-state relocation, and inconsistent statements maintained for over 20 years. They pointed out Eric's actions matched at a high level the profile of a perpetrator concealing a death from an explosive conflict. Defense counsel argued the fall was accidental and Eric panicked into concealment, but the prosecution countered that the 22-year chain, from not calling emergency services, hiding the body, cleaning the vehicle, sending the fake email, using the victim's ATM card, relocating, concealing the laptop, deleting data was deliberate and conscious conduct fitting serious criminal elements rather than immediate panic response. When evidence presentation concluded, the prosecution assembled all fragments into a continuous timeline: conflict that night, fatal fall injury, body transport in gym bag, industrial chemical vehicle cleanup, burial at Clear Creek Canyon, fake email to mislead family and police, relocation to California, silence for over 2 decades. The jury listened in absolute silence as the 22-year chain was narrated through science, logic, and Eric's own confession. In the subsequent closed deliberations, jurors relied entirely on objective evidence, no emotion, no speculation. They reviewed metadata, GPR maps, vehicle chemical traces, victim DNA, movement timeline, and witness statement. When all pieces were placed together, the verdict became clear. The verdict was announced at the conclusion of the Denver trial in 2023, after nearly 2 months of proceedings and 3 days of jury deliberation. When all the evidence from forensics, digital analysis, financial records, behavioral modeling, to the confession was stacked together, the jury unanimously concluded that Eric Donnelly's actions could not be viewed as a single panicked accident, but rather as a deliberate chain of conduct aimed at concealing Lena Marquez's death, deceiving investigators, and delaying the truth for more than 22 years. The court acknowledged that the fatal fall as described by Eric had no direct contradicting evidence, yet the entire subsequent conduct, not calling emergency services, moving the body, digging a burial pit, chemically cleaning the vehicle with industrial solvents, forging an email, using the victim's ATM card, leaving Colorado, deleting data, and concealing the laptop, demonstrated a serious level of intentional concealment and prolonged obstruction of justice. The prosecution recommended a 32-year sentence based on the combination of charges: tampering with physical evidence, obstruction of justice, abuse of a corpse, identity fraud, and extended interference with the investigation. Defense counsel requested leniency, arguing that Lena's death was unintentional and that Eric had cooperated in the final phase by pointing out the body's location, thereby giving the victim's family answers. However, the judge emphasized that the degree of proactive criminal concealment by Eric was unprecedented in Denver's missing persons files, and maintaining secrecy for over 2 decades had inflicted immeasurable harm on Lena's family as well as the course of justice. Ultimately, the sentence imposed was 28 years imprisonment, a term reflecting the gravity of the concealment behavior and the prolonged legal consequences Eric had caused. As the sentence was read, Eric bowed his head without reaction, hands clenched tightly, his body nearly collapsing as court officers escorted him from the courtroom. In the spectator gallery, Lena's mother broke into sobs upon hearing her daughter's name mentioned again in the sentencing, and many in the community, who had followed the 2001 disappearance case, fell silent at the moment when justice, though long delayed, finally arrived. Immediately following the ruling, the Lakewood Police Department officially closed cold case file CC-01-1147, marking the end of one of the city's longest-standing unresolved cases. In the summary report submitted to the prosecutor's office and the FBI, the investigative team listed all the techniques that contributed to solving the case, from email metadata analysis, a method virtually non-existent in 2001, to the use of thermal drones for search area scanning, ground-penetrating radar (GPR) to detect disturbed soil, and advanced chemical analysis to identify industrial cleaner traces on the vehicle mat. The report highlighted the particularly crucial role of the 2020 cold case file digitization, which served as the turning point in uncovering anomalies in the email previously treated as a dead-end lead. Additionally, the Behavioral Analysis Unit summarized that the case was a textbook example of how post-offense behavioral modeling can reconstruct truth in conditions initially lacking physical evidence. They noted that Eric's actions, from adjusting statements, relocating out of state, concealing the victim's device, to offering versions of events inconsistent with objective data, all fit the profile of a perpetrator attempting to sustain a false narrative over an extended period. The witness, who emerged after 22 years, though contributing only a small piece, was evaluated as the completing link that connected forensic and digital data. Cold case experts concluded that the Lena Marquez case demonstrated a foundational principle of modern investigation: no evidence is permanently useless, only the moment when technology becomes powerful enough to make it useful. At the post-trial press conference, an FBI representative declared the case an unprecedented combination of next-generation forensic science, behavioral analysis, digital data, and persistence spanning more than 2 decades. The Denver community looked back on the case as a powerful reminder of the strength of cold case units when properly resourced, and the necessity of preserving every piece of evidence, even when it appears to hold no value at the outset. Finally, at a small memorial held at Clear Creek Canyon, Lena's family placed a bouquet at the excavation site, the place they believe the truth was ultimately found and where the journey of justice came to an end. After 22 long years. In the story of the 2001 Denver cold case, what deeply resonates with American readers today is not only the tragedy of Lena Marquez, but also how the investigative system, technology, and community can make the difference between someone being missing without a trace and the truth being revealed after more than 2 decades. Eric Donnelly's concealment of Lena's Sony Vaio laptop in a storage bin for 22 years, or his sending of a fake email from Dana Point to mislead, shows that even the faintest digital traces have the potential to resurface. This reflects a reality in the United States today. Every online action leaves a footprint, and modern forensic technology can exploit those traces in ways unimaginable in 2001. The life lesson is that honesty and transparency are always the least painful path, because concealing a mistake does not make it disappear. It only prolongs and intensifies the consequences, as Eric's concealment of the body turned a potential manslaughter charge into a series of concealment and obstruction offenses carrying a 28-year sentence. Additionally, the story underscores the importance of cold case units and the persistence of victims' families in the American justice system. Without the 2020 file digitization effort, the 2001 email metadata would never have been reanalyzed, and file CC-01-1147 might have remained dormant forever. The lesson for the community is to always report anything unusual, no matter how small, and to trust in the value of preserving information, because disjointed fragments can become the key when science advances. Ultimately, the case reminds every American that justice can arrive late, but it demands our persistence, faith in the legal system, and belief that truth can be uncovered even after 22 years of being buried. If you want to continue following cold cases solved through the power of technology and perseverance like Lena Marquez's story, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Thank you for joining us, and see you again in the journey of uncovering truth in cases that once seemed lost to oblivion.